Hello, dear friend. Welcome to Sacred Rest. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for this time of peaceful reflection and spiritual rest. Wherever you are in the world right now, I hope this finds you settling into a comfortable space. How was your day? Was it filled with joy and laughter, or perhaps challenges that left you weary? Whatever experiences you've carried through your hours, know that this is a safe place to set them down. What time is it where you are? Perhaps it's the deep of night, when the world has grown quiet and stars pepper the sky. Maybe it's early evening, and you're seeking a moment of calm before sleep. Or perhaps you're listening in the gentle light of dawn. Wherever you're from in our vast, beautiful world, whether you're nestled in a busy city or somewhere quiet and remote, I welcome you to this sacred time. If you found comfort in these meditations, I'd be deeply grateful if you would subscribe to Sacred Rest. Your subscription helps this ministry continue providing peaceful, scripture-based sleep meditations to those who need them most. When we gather together in this digital sanctuary, we create a community of believers finding rest in God's presence. Now I invite you to settle more deeply into your bed or chair. Feel the weight of your body being supported. Notice where you might be holding tension, perhaps in your shoulders, your jaw, or your hands, and gently release it with each breath. Breathe in God's peace and exhale any lingering worries. Tonight, we'll journey across the Sea of Galilee with Jesus and his disciples. We'll witness how even the fiercest storms must bow to his gentle command. In your own life, whatever storms you face, anxiety, uncertainty, fear, or overwhelm, this story reminds us of a profound truth. The one who calms the seas can calm our hearts as well. Let's begin with a prayer. Loving Father, as we prepare for rest, we invite your peace to wash over us. Still our racing thoughts and calm our beating hearts. As we journey through this story of your Son's power over the storm, help us to trust you with the storms in our own lives. May this time be a sanctuary of rest and renewal. In Jesus' name, Amen. The day had been long, wonderfully full but exhausting. Jesus had been teaching since morning, sharing parables about seeds and lamps and the mysterious growth of God's kingdom. Crowds had pressed in around him, their faces eager and questioning, their needs endless. As the golden light of late afternoon stretched across the hillside surrounding the Sea of Galilee, Jesus looked out at the water, its surface catching the amber glow of the setting sun. "Let us go across to the other side," he said simply to his disciples. The men nodded, familiar with their rabbi's ways by now. When the crowds grew too large, when the demands became too constant, Jesus would often seek the quiet of the water or the solitude of the hills. They understood his need for moments of peace. The disciples began preparing a fishing boat, one they had used many times before. It wasn't large, but it was sturdy enough for the journey across the lake. Several of them were fishermen after all. Peter, Andrew, James, and John knew these waters intimately. They had spent countless nights on this very sea, reading its moods, respecting its power, harvesting its bounty. As the last remnants of the crowd dispersed, moving back toward the villages dotting the shoreline, the disciples helped Jesus into the boat. They couldn't help but notice the weariness in his movements, the heaviness in his shoulders. He had given so much of himself that day, healing the sick, answering questions, teaching with stories that somehow made the mysteries of heaven feel tangible and close. There were other boats setting out with them, smaller vessels carrying more followers who weren't ready to end their time with the teacher. The little flotilla pushed away from shore, wooden hulls creaking gently as they slipped into deeper water. Oars dipped rhythmically, creating small whirlpools that glinted copper in the fading light. In the stern of the boat, Jesus found a cushion, a simple thing made of cloth and stuffed with wool. Without ceremony, he laid his head upon it. The gentle rocking motion of the boat, the soft splashing of water against the hull, and the quiet murmuring of his friends' voices created a lullaby that his exhausted body could not resist. Within moments, Jesus was asleep, his breathing deep and even. The disciples continued their work, some rowing, others adjusting the small sail to catch what little breeze stirred across the water. They talked quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing back at their sleeping teacher with affection and protectiveness. "He pushed himself too hard again today," Peter whispered to John. "Did you see how many people he healed?" Matthew added. "And yet he had time to explain his parables to us afterward." "I'm still thinking about the mustard seed," Thomas said thoughtfully. "How something so small can become something so significant." As they conversed, the brilliance of sunset gave way to the soft indigo of early evening. Stars began to appear, first one, then dozens, then hundreds, until the heavens above them shimmered with light. The moon, nearly full, cast a silver pathway across the water. Under different circumstances it would have been a perfect night for sailing. But the Sea of Galilee, nestled as it was in a basin surrounded by hills and mountains, was known for its sudden, violent storms. Cool air from the Mediterranean could rush down the mountain passes and collide with the warm air over the lake, creating tempests that arose with frightening speed. And on this night, as Jesus slept, the first signs of change began to appear. It started subtly, a freshening of the breeze that made the sail suddenly grow taut. The disciples, who were fishermen, exchanged knowing glances. They had felt this shift before. "Perhaps we should wake him," Andrew suggested, looking back at Jesus. "No," Peter replied. "Let him rest. We can handle a bit of wind." But the breeze continued to strengthen, becoming a wind, and then a gale. The surface of the water, which had been as smooth as polished glass, began to roughen. Small wavelets appeared, growing quickly into swells. The boat, which had been gliding peacefully, now began to pitch and roll. The other boats that had been following them were already turning back toward the shore they had left, their occupants clearly visible in the moonlight, faces turned upward at the darkening sky. But Jesus' boat was now nearly in the middle of the lake, equally distant from both shores. Turning back would be as dangerous as continuing forward. Within minutes the wind was howling through the rigging. The sail had to be quickly furled before it could tear or, worse, overturn the vessel. The disciples moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had faced such conditions before, but even they could not hide their growing concern. The sky, which had been clear and star-filled just moments before, was now obscured by fast-moving clouds that seemed to boil out of nowhere. The moon disappeared behind them, plunging the lake into shadowy darkness, broken only by the white foam of wave caps. Now the boat was being tossed violently. Waves crashed over the bow, sending frigid water cascading into the hull. Several of the men scrambled to bail with whatever containers they could find, while others struggled with the oars, trying to keep the vessel from being broadside to the swells. "This is getting dangerous," James shouted over the roar of the wind. "I've never seen it come up so quickly," his brother John replied, his face glistening with spray. The storm continued to intensify. Lightning now split the darkness, illuminating the scene in stark, terrifying detail. Waves as tall as a man's height, disciples with fear etched across their faces, and still somehow Jesus remained asleep in the stern. Water was coming in faster than they could bail it out. The boat was riding lower in the water, each wave bringing them closer to the point where they would be swamped entirely. Even Peter, who had weathered countless storms on this lake, felt a cold fear gripping his heart. They were in real danger now. The disciples looked at one another, their expressions reflecting a dawning realization. For all their experience, for all their skill, this storm might be beyond their ability to survive. Death felt suddenly uncomfortably close, a cold presence riding the winds that screamed around them. "Where is your faith in these moments?" a quiet voice might have asked, had anyone been listening. But the disciples could hear only the howling wind, the crashing waves, and the hammering of their own frightened hearts. And still, Jesus slept. It was Philip who finally broke. "We need to wake him," he shouted, gesturing wildly toward the stern. The others nodded in agreement, though none could have articulated exactly what they expected Jesus to do. He was no sailor. He had spent his life as a carpenter, not a fisherman. And yet, in their moment of greatest fear, they turned to him instinctively. Peter struggled toward the stern, fighting to keep his balance as the boat heaved beneath him. He reached Jesus and knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Even in the midst of chaos, Peter couldn't help but marvel. How could anyone sleep through such violence? "Master!" Peter called, having to shout to be heard over the storm. "Master, wake up!" Jesus stirred slightly but did not wake. The boat pitched violently, nearly throwing Peter off his feet. He gripped Jesus' robe more firmly. "Teacher," this time it was John who'd made his way to join Peter, "don't you care if we drown?" Those words, spoken from fear rather than faith, seemed to penetrate Jesus' sleep. His eyes opened, taking in the scene around him with calm clarity. The water sloshing in the bottom of the boat, the sail straining against its ties, his friends' faces contorted with fear. There was no disorientation, no moment of confusion or alarm. Jesus simply sat up, his movements unhurried even as the boat threatened to capsize beneath him. Water streamed from his hair and beard. His robe was soaked through. Yet he showed no sign of the terror that had overcome his disciples. What happened next would be burned into the memory of every man present. A moment they would recount countless times in the years to come, a demonstration of power so profound that it would forever alter their understanding of the one they followed. Jesus stood up, in a boat being violently tossed by waves. When standing was nearly impossible, Jesus rose to his feet with perfect balance, as though the deck beneath him was solid ground. He looked out at the churning waters, at the dark sky split by lightning, at the wind that howled like a living thing. And then he spoke. Just 3 words, uttered not in a shout to be heard over the storm, but in a tone of quiet authority, as one who expected to be obeyed. "Peace, be still." The Greek words, siopa pephimoso, carried a weight beyond their literal meaning. Silence. Be muzzled, as though addressing not unthinking elements, but a creature that could hear and must obey. What happened next defied all natural law, all human experience. The wind ceased. Not gradually, not with diminishing gusts that slowly faded away. It simply stopped, as completely as if a door had been closed against it. One moment it howled with deadly force, the next it was gone, and the waves, which should have continued to roll and crash even after the wind died, also subsided immediately. The surface of the lake, which moments before had been a chaotic, foam-streaked nightmare, became as smooth as polished marble. So complete was the transformation that the stars, once again visible in the cleared sky, reflected perfectly in the water's surface, as though the disciples floated in the midst of infinite space. The silence that followed was profound, almost shocking in its completeness. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of small wavelets against the hull and the ragged breathing of the disciples. For a long moment no one spoke. They stared at Jesus, then at the suddenly calm water, then back at Jesus. Their minds struggled to process what they had just witnessed. This was beyond their categories, beyond their understanding of what was possible. It was Jesus who finally broke the silence, his voice gentle yet penetrating in the stillness. He looked at each of his disciples in turn, his gaze both loving and challenging. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked. "Do you still have no faith?" The questions hung in the air, not accusatory but probing, inviting self-examination. Faith. Such a small word for such a profound concept. They had believed in him enough to follow him, to leave their livelihoods behind. They had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, challenge the religious authorities. They had committed their lives to his cause. But this kind of faith, faith that remained steady when death seemed certain, faith that trusted even when all evidence suggested they were doomed, this was another level entirely. This was faith that could sleep through a storm. The disciples did not answer Jesus' questions. Instead, they posed their own, speaking in hushed, awestruck tones among themselves. "Who is this?" they whispered. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." It was the question that would echo through their hearts for days, weeks, years to come. Who is this man we have chosen to follow? If the forces of nature bend to his will, what might that mean? The implications were staggering, too vast to fully comprehend in that moment of stunned amazement. The boat continued to drift peacefully on the now placid surface of the lake. Above them, the night sky had cleared entirely, revealing a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch. The moon cast its silver light once more, creating a path of a shimmering brightness that stretched toward the eastern shore. Jesus did not press them for answers to his questions. He simply sat back down in the stern, his expression serene. Perhaps he understood that the seed had been planted, a seed of deeper understanding that would take time to germinate and grow. The disciples returned to their positions, taking up oars once more to continue the journey to the other side. But they rowed differently now, their movements careful and reverent, as though the very air around them had become sacred space. Occasionally they would glance at Jesus, then at one another, communicating without words their shared astonishment. As they approached the eastern shore, the first light of dawn began to paint the sky with gentle hues of pink and gold. A new day was beginning, and for the disciples, it would be a day coloured by the extraordinary revelation of the night. They had embarked on this journey as followers of a remarkable teacher. They would disembark with the dawning realization that they were in the presence of someone far greater than they had imagined. The boat's hull scraped gently against the shore. One by one, the disciples stepped out, their feet sinking into the wet sand. Jesus was the last to disembark, moving with the same quiet grace that characterized all his actions. As his foot touched the shore, he paused for a moment, gazing back across the now peaceful waters. Perhaps he was thinking of the lesson his friends had just learned, or perhaps of the greater storms, the deeper challenges that still awaited them all. For this night's tempest, however terrifying, was but a small preview of the forces that would one day rage against him and those who loved him. But those were concerns for another day. For now, Jesus simply turned toward the rising sun and began walking inland, knowing his disciples would follow, and they did, their footsteps in the sand forming a pattern behind his, a visual representation of the faith journey they had embarked upon, still uncertain, but now enriched by a deeper glimpse of the one they followed, the one who could speak to storms and be obeyed. As we rest in the stillness of this moment, let's reflect on what we've just witnessed through the eyes of the disciples. Feel the residual awe that must have lingered in their hearts as they processed what had happened on that lake. The one they thought they knew had revealed himself to be far more powerful, far more majestic than they had imagined. Perhaps you find yourself in a storm right now, not one of wind and waves, but a storm nonetheless. It might be anxiety that crashes over you like relentless waves. It might be uncertainty about the future, rising like dark clouds on the horizon. It might be grief or loneliness or fear, emotions that howl through your heart like a gale-force wind. Take a moment to name your storm silently. What is causing turbulence in your life right now? What makes your heart race with worry or your mind churn with doubt? Pause. Now imagine Jesus in your boat. Yes, right there with you in the midst of your personal tempest. This is not wishful thinking or mere metaphor. It is the profound reality of the Christian faith. Emmanuel, God with us, not God observing from a safe distance, not God waiting for us on the shore after we've weathered the storm alone, but God present in the very midst of our chaos. And here is something remarkable to consider. In the story we've just heard, Jesus didn't calm the storm immediately. First, he slept through it. There's a profound lesson here that's easy to miss. Sometimes the greatest demonstration of faith is not receiving an immediate solution to our problem, but finding peace in the midst of it, peace so profound it can rest, even when everything around it is in chaos. Jesus sleeping in the storm wasn't indifference. It was a demonstration of absolute trust in the Father. It was a live sermon more powerful than any words he could have spoken. You can rest even when the storms rage, because you know who holds you. Take a deep breath and sit with that thought for a moment. Pause. Now consider the words Jesus spoke to the disciples. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? These weren't words of condemnation, but an invitation to growth. Jesus was gently showing them the gap between what they professed to believe about him and how they behaved when circumstances became frightening. He was calling them to a faith that remained steady even when situations suggest there's reason to panic. What might Jesus be inviting you to trust him with right now? Where in your life might he be saying, "Peace, be still"? Pause. There's another beautiful detail in this story that's worth lingering over. Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Not let us go into the middle of the lake and drown. He had already declared the destination before the journey began. Despite the storm that arose, his intention remained unchanged. They were going to reach the other side. In your own life, what other side has Jesus promised you? What word has he spoken over your situation that the current storm seems to contradict? Hold fast to his promise. The storm, no matter how violent, cannot prevent the fulfillment of his declared purpose. When Jesus commands something, whether it's peace, be still, to a raging sea, or let us go to the other side to his disciples, it will come to pass. His word does not return void. It accomplishes what he intends. There's a particular comfort in knowing that the same voice that commanded the elements has spoken over your life. The same authority that subdued the storm is engaged with your circumstances. The same love that prompted Jesus to stand and act on behalf of his frightened friends is extended to you as you navigate your own waters. Listen now for his voice in the quiet of your heart. Perhaps he's not removing your storm immediately. Perhaps, like the disciples, you're being invited to know him more deeply through the experience of watching him work in unexpected ways. But know this, he is in your boat. And because of that, you will reach the shore. Let the gentle rocking of the now calm waters lull you toward rest. Feel the tension leave your body as you entrust yourself to the one who commands the wind and waves. Whatever storms tomorrow may bring, tonight you rest in the presence of the storm calmer, the peace speaker, the Lord of wind and wave. Let these words wash over you like gentle waves. Peace, be still. You are safe in his hands. Let go of your worries. Let him hold them now. Peace, be still. Rest in this truth. If the winds and waves obey him, so can your anxious heart. You don't have to control the storm. You just have to rest with the one who can. As we come to the close of our time together, I want to offer a blessing over you as you prepare for sleep. May you rest tonight in the perfect peace that comes from knowing the master of the storm is watching over you. May you sleep deeply, secure in the knowledge that the same God who calmed the Sea of Galilee is present in your room, attentive to your breathing, mindful of your needs. May your dreams be serene, unthreatened by the storms of waking life. May the gentle rocking of God's love lull you into profound rest, the kind of rest that renews not just the body but the soul. May you awaken tomorrow with the disciples' question still echoing in your heart. Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him. And may that wonder lead you into a day lived with greater trust and deeper peace. Let us pray. Loving Father, I thank you for the precious soul listening right now. You know their name, their face, their struggles, and their joys. You know the storms they've weathered, and the ones that may still lie ahead. I ask that you would spread your mantle of peace over them tonight. Quiet their racing thoughts, slow their breathing, release the tension from their muscles, guard their mind against anxious ruminations, and fill it instead with the truth of your loving presence. Lord Jesus, just as you stood in authority over the storm on Galilee, I ask you to speak peace, be still over any turbulence in their life. Calm the waters of their circumstances. Quiet the winds of their worry. Help them to rest in the boat with you, trusting that you will bring them safely to the other side. Holy Spirit, be the breath of God in this room tonight. Fill this space with your comforting presence. Minister to the deep places of hurt or fear that conscious thought cannot reach. Repair, restore and renew as only you can do during the sacred hours of sleep. We rest tonight in the perfect love that casts out fear, in the mighty name of Jesus who calms all storms. Amen. Remember, dear friend, Jesus is in your boat. The journey continues tomorrow, but tonight you can sleep in perfect peace. You're watched over. You are loved. You're not alone. Good night, and may God bless your rest. In the quiet of this moment, I invite you to find a comfortable position. Perhaps you're already settled in bed, your head resting on your pillow, or maybe you're preparing for rest after a long day. Wherever you are, however you've arrived at this moment, know that you are welcomed here with tenderness and care. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Feel the weight of your body surrendering to the support beneath you. Notice how your shoulders can soften, how your hands can rest without grasping, how your face can release any tension it's been holding. There's nothing you need to do right now except breathe and listen. Let's breathe together for a moment. Inhale slowly through your nose, feeling the cool air fill your lungs. Hold it gently for just a moment, and then exhale through your mouth, releasing anything that doesn't serve your peace. Inhale comfort, exhale worry, inhale divine peace, exhale human striving, inhale rest, exhale burden. With each breath, you're creating space within yourself, space for stillness, space for quiet, space for the gentle voice that calls you by name. I invite you now to begin visualizing a journey. As you continue breathing slowly and deeply, imagine yourself walking along a narrow country path. It's late afternoon, and the golden light of the setting sun bathes everything in a warm glow. The air is perfect, not too warm, not too cool, and carries the sweet scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. The path winds gently through rolling hills. With each step you feel more of your daily concerns falling away. The emails waiting for responses, the conversations that left you wondering, the tasks still uncompleted, all of these can wait outside this peaceful moment. As you walk, you notice the sound of birdsong in the distance, not the busy chattering songs of morning birds, but the gentle settled sounds of evening, soft calls that seem to whisper, "All is well, rest is coming." The path begins to crest a small hill, and as you reach the top you see before you a wide meadow. The grass sways gently in a soft breeze, creating waves of movement like a green sea. Scattered throughout are wildflowers in gentle hues, pale yellows, soft whites, and tender purples. At the far edge of this meadow, you can just make out the stone walls of an ancient sheepfold, a place of gathering, a place of safety, a place of rest. This is where our journey is taking us tonight, to the sheepfold of the Good Shepherd. As you descend the hill toward the meadow, you feel a sense of being both completely free and completely held. The vast open sky above reminds you of boundless possibility, while the path beneath your feet assures you that you're being guided. With each step, your breathing continues to deepen. Your inhales become fuller, your exhales become longer. Your mind begins to quiet like waters settling after a storm. The path now leads you into the meadow itself. The grass reaches up past your ankles, brushing against you with feather-like touches. You can feel the earth beneath your feet, solid, supportive, ancient. As you walk, you begin to notice the sounds of sheep in the distance, not loud or disturbing, but the gentle bleating that speaks of contentment and security. They're calling to one another as they make their way toward the sheepfold for the night. And then you hear something else, a voice. Low and warm, it carries across the meadow with remarkable clarity. It's not calling to you, not yet, but to the sheep. And you notice how they respond, turning their heads, adjusting their path, moving with purpose toward the voice. This is the voice of the shepherd, calling his sheep to evening rest. Each one knows this voice intimately. Each one trusts this voice implicitly. Each one follows this voice instinctively. As you continue your walk through the meadow, drawn toward the sheepfold just as the sheep are drawn, you begin to feel a sense of recognition stirring within you. Something about this voice awakens a deep memory, not from yesterday or last year, but from the very foundation of your being. It's as if your soul remembers this voice from before time began. The path begins to widen as you near the sheepfold. The stone walls become clearer now, smooth, weathered stones carefully placed one upon another by hands that understood the importance of creating sanctuary. These walls have stood through countless seasons, through rain and wind and snow and sun, remaining steadfast in their purpose, to protect, to shelter, to create a space of safety. As you draw nearer, you see the entrance to the sheepfold, a simple opening in the wall. There is no gate of wood or metal, for in this place, in this story, the shepherd himself serves as the gate. Nothing enters that is not first approved by him. Nothing threatens that is not first faced by him. The voice continues to call, naming each sheep individually, knowing each one's unique needs, tendencies, and nature. And as the sun begins to sink lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the meadow, you find yourself at the entrance to the sheepfold, ready to cross the threshold into deeper rest. As you stand at the entrance to the sheepfold, you pause to take in its simple beauty. The circular stone walls rise about 4 feet high, tall enough to keep the sheep secure, yet low enough that the shepherd can see over them to watch for any approach of danger. The stones themselves seem to hold stories, their surfaces marked by time and weather, yet their arrangement remains sturdy and true. The ground inside the sheepfold has been softened by the passage of countless sheep over many years. What might once have been rocky earth has become a cushioned, almost velvety surface, perfect for rest. In some areas, particularly along the inside edge of the wall, tufts of soft grass have grown, creating natural pillows for weary heads. You notice that while the day remains warm, there is a coolness gathered in the shadows of the walls, a reminder that night approaches and with it the deeper rest that darkness brings. The air here carries a different quality. Sheltered from the breeze that moves across the open meadow, it feels somehow more concentrated, more present. As you step inside, crossing the threshold where the shepherd stands watch, you feel a subtle shift in your awareness. The sounds of the wider world seem to soften. The concerns that normally occupy your thoughts recede further. Here, within these ancient walls, existence becomes simpler. There is no need to navigate complex decisions or manage difficult relationships. There is only the present moment, the approaching night, and the protective presence of the shepherd. You find a place to sit against the wall where the last rays of sunlight still warm the stones. From here, you can watch as the sheep continue to arrive, each responding to its name when called, each receiving a gentle touch from the shepherd as it passes by him into the fold. This is how it has been done for thousands of years in the hill country. This ancient rhythm of call and response, of leaving the wide pastures for the secure fold, of trusting the one who leads and protects. Nothing about this scene would look unfamiliar to someone from centuries past. The relationship between shepherd and sheep transcends time, speaking to something essential about care and trust. In ancient times, you remember hearing, shepherds would often combine their flocks during the day, allowing the sheep to graze together in larger numbers. But when evening came, each shepherd would call only to his own sheep, using distinctive sounds or words that only his flock recognized. Remarkably, the sheep would separate themselves, following only the voice they knew, never confused by the calls of other shepherds. As you observe this evening gathering, you notice the care with which the shepherd examines each sheep as it enters. His hands move gently over wool and skin, checking for injuries or thorns that might have been gathered during the day's wandering. For one sheep, he removes a small burr caught in the thick wool. For another, he applies a soothing balm to a minor scrape. No need goes unnoticed, no discomfort goes untended. The sheep themselves seem to welcome this attention. Though some are clearly tired from the day's grazing, they pause willingly for the shepherd's examination. There is trust in their stillness, contentment in their patience. They know these hands, they know this voice, they know they are cared for individually, specifically, attentively. As the fold fills with more sheep, you notice the distinctive sounds they make. Not the loud bleating of alarm, but the soft, low sounds of recognition and settlement. They are talking to each other and to the shepherd in their own language of belonging. The air begins to cool more noticeably as the sun touches the horizon. Long shadows stretch across the sheepfold, and the stone walls now provide not just security, but shelter from the light evening breeze. The shepherd moves among the gathered sheep, his presence clearly bringing them comfort. Some draw closer to him as he passes, seeking the reassurance of proximity. You watch as he kneels beside one sheep that seems particularly restless. He speaks softly to it, words you cannot quite hear from where you sit, but you can see the effect. The sheep's breathing slows, its movements still. Its eyes close in what can only be described as surrender to care. This, you realize, is what true safety looks like. Not the absence of all threat, but the presence of one who is trustworthy enough to allow complete vulnerability. The sheep do not need to remain vigilant because the shepherd stays watchful. They do not need to worry about provision because the shepherd knows where the sweet water flows and the tender grass grows. They do not need to fear the darkness because the shepherd's sight penetrates what they cannot see. As twilight deepens into early evening, a profound quiet descends upon the sheepfold. The activities of the day, the walking, the grazing, the occasional startle running, have given way to stillness. Energy spent has prepared the way for deep restoration. The shepherd now sits at the entrance to the fold, his back against one of the stone walls, his staff across his lap. From this position, he can see both outward across the meadow and inward to the gathered flock. Nothing approaches without his knowledge. Nothing disturbs without his permission. In this ancient pattern, In this timeless scene, you feel your own breathing continuing to slow, your own thoughts continuing to quiet. The simple rightness of this place seeps into your awareness. The stone walls that have sheltered generations, the soft earth that welcomes rest, the attentive presence that makes vulnerability safe. As night begins to embrace the world outside the fold, you feel yourself drawn deeper into the peace of this sanctuary. The voice of the shepherd, which first called across the meadow, now speaks in the silence of complete trust. And though no words are spoken aloud, you understand with perfect clarity. You are known, you are seen, you are safe. As the night deepens around the sheepfold, the stars begin to appear overhead. First one, then another, then suddenly a multitude, transforming the darkness into a vast canvas of light. The shepherd remains at his post, a silhouette of watchful presence against the night sky. In this moment of perfect stillness, words from ancient scripture rise in your mind, words that have brought comfort to countless souls through the centuries. The 10th chapter of John's Gospel, where Jesus describes himself as the Good Shepherd, speaks with particular resonance in this place of safety and rest. Listen now as the words flow gently into your consciousness. Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. Pause and consider this image of the gate. In ancient sheepfolds like this one, the shepherd would often position himself in the opening of the wall, literally becoming the gate. Nothing could enter without passing by him first. No predator could threaten, no thief could steal, no sheep could wander away without encountering the shepherd's watchful presence. Imagine now what it means to have such protection. Not a cold barrier of wood or metal, but a living, attentive guardian who knows each one by name. This is not distant security, but intimate care. This is not impersonal safety, but relationship-based protection. The words continue to unfold. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd, and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Reflect on the difference between hired protection and devoted care. The difference is not in skill or strength, but in relationship and commitment. The Good Shepherd's connection to the sheep is not a transaction but a bond. His protection flows not from duty but from love. As you gaze across the sheepfold, you can see this truth embodied in the shepherd's posture, alert but relaxed, vigilant but peaceful. His attention never wavers, yet it carries no tension. This is the watching that comes from love rather than obligation. The sacred text continues, I am the Good Shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Imagine being known, fully known, and still loved without hesitation. Not the surface knowing of casual acquaintance, but the deep knowing that sees every fear, every hope, every quiet corner of your heart. The shepherd knows when you are afraid, when you are lonely, when you are in pain. He knows when you have wandered, when you have stumbled, when you have fallen, and still he calls your name with tenderness. This knowing is not one-directional. The sheep also know their shepherd. They recognize his voice among all others. They trust his guidance without question. They follow his leading with confidence because experience has taught them that he brings them to good places, to fresh water, to green pastures, to safe rest. As these words settle into your spirit, another passage emerges. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." There is a certainty in these words, a promise of security that transcends physical safety. The shepherd's care extends beyond the immediate dangers of wolves and thieves to the deeper threats of meaninglessness and separation. His protection covers not just the body but the soul. His provision satisfies not just physical hunger, but spiritual longing. As you reflect on these words, you notice the sheep in the fold have arranged themselves in a pattern that seems both random and intentional. Some cluster together for warmth, others maintain a small space of separation. Some lie with their heads toward the centre, others face the walls. Each has found the position that brings them comfort, yet all remain within the protective circle of the shepherd's care. Is this not a beautiful picture of community within security? Unity without uniformity? Each sheep is different, in size, in age, in temperament, yet all are equally valued, equally protected, equally known by name. The night has fully embraced the world now. The meadow beyond the sheepfold lies invisible in darkness, but here within the circle of stone walls there is no fear of what cannot be seen. The shepherd's presence transforms the night from a time of vulnerability to a season of rest. One more passage rises in your awareness. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. These words speak of expansion, of inclusion, of a circle of care that continues to widen. The shepherd's heart is not limited to those already gathered, but extends to those still wandering, still searching, still unsure of where they belong. As you let these ancient words settle deeply into your consciousness, you notice that the rhythm of your breathing is synchronized with the gentle rise and fall of the sleeping sheep around you. There is a harmony here, a natural community formed not by effortful connection, but by shared trust in the one who watches over all. The shepherd's eyes meet yours across the sheepfold, and in that glance you understand you too are invited into this circle of care. You too are known by name. You too are welcome to rest under the watchflies of the one who never slumbers. As the night grows deeper, something remarkable happens. The scene around you begins to shift, not in a jarring way, but with the gentle transformation of a dream unfolding. The walls of the sheepfold seem to dissolve, and you find yourself no longer sitting against the stones, but standing in an open field just as dawn begins to break on the horizon. The sheep are rising from their rest, stretching and shaking the night stillness from their bodies. The shepherd moves among them, speaking softly to each one, calling names that sound like music in the morning air. He turns to you now, his eyes finding yours with a gaze that feels at once ancient and immediate. With a small gesture of his hand, he invites you to join him as he prepares to lead the flock to fresh pastures. You rise and move toward him, feeling neither rushed nor hesitant. There is a rightness to this moment, as if it has been waiting for you through all the days of your life. "Come," he says, his voice both gentler and more compelling than you imagined. "Walk with me a while." As the sheep begin to follow the shepherd out into the wider fields, you find yourself walking alongside him. Not ahead, not behind, but beside, close enough to hear his breathing, to notice the deliberate placement of his feet on the earth, to feel the subtle movements of the air as he lifts his staff to guide the way. The morning unfolds around you in a symphony of sensory experiences. The earth beneath your feet feels solid yet yielding, supporting each step without resistance. The cool morning air carries the mingled scents of grass, wild flowers, and the earthy wool of the sheep. Light increases gradually as the sun climbs higher, illuminating the landscape in stages, first outlining the hills in gold, then filling the valleys with amber light, finally bathing everything in the clear radiance of full morning. You notice that the shepherd does not hurry. His pace is steady but unhurried, considerate of the youngest lambs and the oldest ewes. There is no sense of urgency, no anxiety about reaching a destination by a certain time. The journey itself holds as much importance as the arrival. The sheep need movement, the shepherd explains, seeming to read your thoughts, but they also need to feel secure in that movement. Too fast and they become anxious. Too slow and they begin to wander. The right pace creates both progress and peace. As you walk, you begin to notice how the sheep respond to the shepherd's voice. When he calls to one that has strayed too near a thorny thicket, it immediately adjusts its path. When he makes a particular clicking sound, the entire flock knows to pause and wait. When he sings a low melodic note, they gather more tightly together. They know my voice, he says simply. Not just its sound, but its meaning. The path begins to ascend a gentle hill. As you climb, you notice how the shepherd positions himself, sometimes ahead to lead the way, sometimes behind to encourage those who lag, sometimes at the side to prevent wandering toward unseen dangers. The greatest deception, he comments, is the belief that freedom means absence of guidance. True freedom comes from trusting the one who sees what you cannot see. From the top of the hill, you can see the landscape spread out in all directions. To the east, where you've come from, the sheepfold stands solid and familiar. To the west, your direction of travel, a wide valley opens up, green with the new grass and dotted with the blue of morning flowers. To the north and south, other hills rise, creating a natural corridor for your journey. The shepherd pauses here, allowing the sheep to rest for a moment and take in the wider view. He stands slightly apart, his eyes scanning the horizon with attentive care. You understand that he's looking for signs of danger, assessing weather patterns, planning the safest route forward. Every step we take has been imagined before we take it, he says, again responding to your unspoken thoughts. I walk these paths in my mind before I walk them with my feet. That is how I can lead with confidence even into new territories. As the journey resumes, you begin to notice the distinct personalities of the sheep around you. Some walk with the confidence of experience, staying close to the shepherd out of choice rather than fear. Others move with the uncertainty of youth, sometimes darting ahead, sometimes falling behind, requiring more of the shepherd's attention. One sheep in particular catches your notice and slightly smaller than the others, with a slight limp that suggests an old injury. This one stays especially close to the shepherd, often walking directly beside him on the opposite side from where you walk. This one knows her need, the shepherd says, his voice warm with affection. She learned through difficulty what some never learn through ease, that proximity to me is better than independence from me. The sun is higher now, warming the air and bringing out the sweet scent of the crushed grass beneath your feet. The path descends into the valley, where a small stream cuts through the field, creating a natural stopping place. The sheep move eagerly toward the water, their thirst evident in their quickened pace. The shepherd guides them to the calmest part of the stream, where the water flows gently and the banks slope gradually. Here the sheep can drink without danger, refreshing themselves in the clear water. You kneel beside the stream yourself, cupping your hands to bring the cool water to your lips. It tastes sweeter than any water you've known before, clean and life-giving. Rest here a while, the shepherd says, settling himself on a smooth rock nearby. The journey continues, but never without restoration along the way. As you sit by the stream, watching the sheep drink and then begin to graze on the lush grass that grows along the banks, you feel a profound sense of being exactly where you are meant to be. There is no striving in this moment, no anxiety about what comes next, no regret about what came before. There is only the present reality of being on the path with the shepherd, moving at his pace, resting at his direction, continuing under his care. The soft sound of the stream, the gentle movements of the grazing sheep, the watchful presence of the shepherd. all combine to create a sense of security so deep that you feel your entire being relaxing into it. This is what it means to be truly led, truly guided, truly known. As the sun reaches its zenith, bathing the valley in golden light, you close your eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth to wash over you. In this perfect stillness, you hear the shepherd's voice once more, not speaking to the sheep now, but to you. The path continues beyond what you can see, but do not be anxious about what lies ahead. I have walked it already. I know every turn, every hill, every valley, and I will never lead you anywhere that I have not prepared for you. As the afternoon light begins to soften, casting longer shadows across the valley, you open your eyes to find the shepherd standing before you, his hand extended in invitation. "Come," he says simply. "There is something I want to show you before the day ends." You rise and follow him, noticing that the sheep have settled into a gentle rhythm of grazing. They seem content to remain in this lush valley for now, secure in the knowledge that the shepherd remains near. He leads you to a small rise overlooking the stream, where a single tree offers dappled shade. Its branches spread wide, creating a natural canopy that filters the sunlight into patterns of gold and shadow on the ground below. "Sit with me here," he says, settling himself against the trunk of the tree. As you join him in the shade, you realize you can see the entire flock from this vantage point. Every sheep is visible, from the confident leaders to the hesitant followers, from the strong to the vulnerable. The shepherd's gaze moves over them with attentive care, missing nothing. "Do you see how they graze without fear?" he asks. "They do not worry about predators or storms or scarcity. They have learned through experience that I provide what they need. I protect them from what would harm them. I guide them to places of abundance." You watch as the sheep move slowly through the grass, tapping to eat, occasionally looking up to confirm the shepherd's presence, then returning to their grazing with peaceful assurance. "This is the gift I offer," the shepherd continues, "not the absence of all danger, but the presence of constant care, not the elimination of all difficulty, but the assurance of never facing it alone. Particularly small lamb catches your attention. It must be one of the newest born to the flock. It stays close to its mother, occasionally frolicking in short bursts of energy before returning to her side. Its wool is especially white, almost luminous in the afternoon light. The youngest ones, the shepherd observes, following your gaze, sometimes need to be carried. When the path grows steep or the day grows long, I lift them into my arms and bear their weight. They learn trust through being held. You consider this, the image of the strong shepherd carrying the vulnerable lamb, not with impatience at its weakness, but with tenderness for its need. "Do you know," he asks, turning to look directly at you, "that I would leave the 99 to find the one? If a single sheep wanders away, becomes lost, falls into danger, I go after it, not because it is more valuable than the others, but because each one is irreplaceable to me. Each one is known by name. Each one matters uniquely." The depth of commitment in his voice moves you deeply. This is not the impersonal care of a distant guardian, but the passionate attention of one who loves specifically, individually, completely. The Good Shepherd, he continues, lays down his life for the sheep, not because the sheep have earned such sacrifice, but because the shepherd's love makes them worth any cost. As he speaks these words, the light shifts, taking on the golden quality of late afternoon. The air grows still, as if the world itself is listening to this truth. "Many voices will call to you," the shepherd says softly. "Some offering easier paths, some promising quicker rewards, some threatening what will happen if you don't follow them. But remember, my sheep know my voice. They recognize it among all others because they have spent time listening, because they have experienced its reliability, because they have found that following it always leads to life." He reaches out and places his hand on your shoulder. the weight of it both grounding and reassuring. "You are not alone in the fields of this world," he says. "Even when you cannot see me, I am watching. Even when you cannot hear me clearly, I am speaking. Even when you wander, I am seeking. This is the promise I make to each one who belongs to me. You will never be forgotten, never be abandoned, never be left without guidance." The sun is beginning its descent toward the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Soon it will be time to lead the sheep back to the safety of the fold for the night. "Trust and rest," the shepherd says, his voice a gentle command. "These are the twins of peace. Trust that I know the way forward. Rest in the knowledge that you are watched over. Together they create a quiet heart even in the midst of a noisy world." As these words settle into your spirit, you notice that your breathing has slowed to match the shepherd's. Deep, unhurried breaths that seem to draw peace directly from the air around you. Your body feels heavy with relaxation, as if every muscle has decided at once to release its tension. "The voice of love is always near," the shepherd murmurs, his words becoming almost musical in their rhythm. "Calling you by name, inviting you to follow, promising presence through every valley and on every mountain top." The sheep are beginning to gather more closely now, sensing the approaching evening. Their movements become slower, their grazing more intermittent. They are preparing for the journey back to the fold. Step by step, you are led to peace, the shepherd continues, his voice growing softer, not in great leaps or sudden flights, but in the patient unfolding of a path walked in trust. Each day has its portion of guidance, each moment carries its own light. He rises now, stretching his arms wide as if to embrace the entire flock at once. The setting sun behind him creates a halo effect, illuminating his outline with golden light. "It is time to return to the fold," he says, extending his hand to help you rise. "The day's journey concludes, but the care never ends. Through the night I watch, through the darkness I guard. When morning comes again, we continue the path together." As you stand, you feel a profound sense of renewal, as if the simple act of walking with the shepherd, listening to his voice, observing his care for the sheep has restored something essential within you. The worries that had weighed on your mind seem distant now, replaced by a calm certainty that you are known, you are valued, you are guided. The shepherd lifts his voice in a distinctive call that immediately draws the attention of every sheep. They respond with remarkable unity, moving toward him from all directions, gathering into a more cohesive group for the journey home. "This is how it has always been," he explains as you begin to walk beside him, the flock following behind. The sheep scattered in feeding, gathered in travelling, diverse in their individual needs, united in their common trust, each one unique, yet part of a greater whole. The path back to the sheepfold seems somehow shorter than the journey out, as if the familiarity of returning home compresses distance itself. The evening light casts long shadows ahead of you, leading the way toward rest. "You're safe," the shepherd says, his voice now barely above a whisper. "You're loved. You're guided." These words repeat like a gentle refrain as you walk, matching the rhythm of your steps, synchronizing with your heartbeat. They are not just sounds, but promises, not just comfort, but truth. They sink deeply into your consciousness, creating a foundation of peace that feels both new and somehow always known. As the sheepfold comes into view, its stone walls glowing with the last light of day, you feel a sense of completion. Not the end of a glory, but the closing of a circle that will open again with the dawn. The shepherd leads the flock through the entrance, counting each one, greeting each by name, ensuring that all who went out have returned safely. When the last sheep has entered the fold, the shepherd takes his place at the gateway, his staff across his knees, his gaze moving between the gathered flock and the darkening landscape beyond. He is the living gate, the constant guardian, the embodiment of care that does not slumber or sleep. Rest now, he says to you, his eyes holding yours with gentle intensity. The shepherd knows your name. The shepherd calls you to rest. The voice of love is always near. As night embraces the world once more, as stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, you feel yourself surrounded by perfect peace, held in the care of the one who calls you by name, who leads you beside still waters, who restores your soul. In this sanctuary of trust, sleep comes not as escape but as gift, not as absence but as presence in the watchful love of the Good Shepherd. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey with the Good Shepherd. If these words have brought you comfort tonight, please consider subscribing to Sacred Rest for more scripture-inspired sleep stories. And I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. May you rest deeply in the knowledge that you are watched over with perfect care through this night and always. Hello dear friends, and welcome back to Sacred Slumber. Before we begin tonight's story, I hope your day has been filled with blessings and peace. Whether it's morning where you are, the quiet of afternoon, or the gentle embrace of evening, know that you are exactly where God wants you to be in this moment. I'm curious about where in this beautiful world you're listening from tonight. Are you nestled in your bed in a bustling city, or perhaps finding solace in the countryside under a canopy of stars? Wherever you are, whatever time it is for you, you are welcomed here with open arms. If this story touches your heart tonight, I encourage you to subscribe to Sacred Slumber. We gather here regularly to explore the profound truths and timeless wisdom found in God's Word, bringing comfort to weary souls and strength to troubled hearts. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these sacred stories that remind us of God's unfailing love and faithfulness. Now let us journey together to ancient Israel, to a time when kingdoms stood at crossroads, when truth was a dangerous commodity, and when one man's courage would echo through the ages. This is the story of Micaiah, the forgotten prophet who dared to stand alone. The sun blazed mercilessly over the ancient city of Samaria, its golden rays dancing across the limestone walls of King Ahab's palace. Within those walls, power brooked no opposition, and truth was often the first casualty of political ambition. It had been 3 years since the last war between Israel and Syria, 3 years of uneasy peace that sat heavy on King Ahab's shoulders like an ill-fitting crown. Ahab paced the marble floors of his throne room, his royal robes rustling with each agitated step. The king of Israel was a man consumed by his desires, a ruler who had long ago traded his soul to the altar of self-interest. His marriage to the foreign princess Jezebel had brought prosperity to his kingdom, but at a cost that would echo through generations. The worship of Baal had infiltrated the very heart of Israel, and the prophets of the Lord had been hunted, killed, or driven into hiding. Yet today something stirred within Ahab's ambitious heart. News had arrived that morning of Syrian movements near Ramoth-Gilead, a strategic city that had once belonged to Israel, but now languished under enemy control. The city's location made it a prize worth fighting for, a gateway that could secure trade routes and strengthen his kingdom's eastern border. As Ahab contemplated this opportunity, word came that King Jehoshaphat of Judah was approaching Samaria with a considerable entourage. Jehoshaphat was everything Ahab was not. A king who sought the Lord's face, who had torn down the high places of idol worship, and who ruled with righteousness as his compass. The irony was not lost on Ahab that he would need the help of such a man to achieve his ambitions. The great doors of the throne room swung open with a resonant boom, and Jehoshaphat entered with the dignity befitting a king of David's lineage. He was a man of medium stature but commanding presence, his beard meticulously groomed, and his eyes holding the wisdom of one who had walked closely with the Almighty. Behind him came his advisers and military commanders, their expressions respectful but cautious, as they entered the domain of Israel's controversial king. "Jehoshaphat, my brother," Ahab called out, his voice echoing through the vast chamber as he descended from his throne. "Welcome to Samaria. Your presence brings honour to my house." The two kings embraced in the customary greeting, though those who knew them well could sense the underlying tension. Jehoshaphat had come seeking alliance, but his heart was troubled by what such an alliance might require of him. "Ahab," Jehoshaphat replied warmly, though his eyes remained watchful. "It has been too long since we have spoken face to face. The Lord has blessed both our kingdoms with peace these past years." "Indeed," Ahab agreed, gesturing toward the laden tables his servants had prepared. "Come, let us feast together and speak of matters that concern us both." The banquet that followed was a spectacle of royal excess. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and wine from the finest vineyards. Musicians played softly in the background, while servants moved like shadows, attending to every need. Yet beneath the veneer of celebration, both kings harboured their own purposes. As the evening wore on and the wine loosened tongues, Ahab finally revealed his true intention. Leaning toward Jehoshaphat with the conspiratorial air of old friends, he spoke in measured tones. "My brother, there is a matter that weighs heavily upon my heart," Ahab began, his eyes glinting in the torchlight. "You know that Ramoth-Gilead belongs to us, yet it remains in the hands of the king of Syria. Should we not take back what is rightfully ours?" Jehoshaphat set down his goblet carefully, his expression growing thoughtful. He had anticipated this moment, knowing that Ahab rarely extended hospitality without purpose. The question hung in the air between them like incense, heavy with implication. "Ramoth-Gilead has indeed been a source of contention," Jehoshaphat replied diplomatically. "What do you propose?" Ahab's smile was that of a merchant who senses a favourable negotiation. "I propose that we go up together against Ramoth-Gilead. Your army combined with mine would be formidable. We could restore the city to Israel and share in the glory of victory." The words were carefully chosen, appealing to both practical strategy and Jehoshaphat's sense of brotherhood among the tribes of Israel. Yet Jehoshaphat had not survived as king by making hasty decisions. His reign had been marked by careful consultation with the Lord, and he would not abandon that practice now. "I am as you are," Jehoshaphat responded slowly. "My people as your people, my horses as your horses. If the Lord wills it, we shall stand together in battle." He paused, his next words carrying the weight of true conviction. "But first let us inquire of the Lord." Ahab's smile faltered slightly. In his eagerness for military glory, he had hoped to avoid the complications that divine consultation might bring. Yet he could hardly refuse such a reasonable request from a potential ally, especially one whose righteousness was renowned throughout the region. "Of course," Ahab agreed, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. "Let us seek the word of the Lord." What followed was a demonstration of the spiritual corruption that had infected Ahab's court. The king summoned his prophets, all 400 of them, men who wore the garments of holiness, but whose hearts served earthly masters. They came in a great procession, their robes flowing and their voices raised in what appeared to be spiritual fervour. These were not true prophets of the Lord, though they claimed his name. They were court prophets, men who understood that their continued prosperity depended upon telling the king what he wished to hear. Their prophecies were crafted not in the secret place of prayer, but in the calculating chambers of political expediency. As the prophets assembled in the courtyard before the two kings, their spokesman stepped forward. His name was Zedekiah, son of Chenaanah, a man whose pride matched his ambition, and whose hatred for true prophets would soon be revealed in violent fashion. "Hear the word of the Lord," Zedekiah proclaimed, his voice carrying across the courtyard with theatrical intensity. "Go up to Ramoth-Gilead and prosper, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king." The 400 prophets took up the cry with orchestrated precision, their voices creating a chorus of false assurance. "Go up to Ramoth-Gilead and prosper. The Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king." Some of the prophets had even prepared visual aids for their performance. They danced and shouted, waving swords and spears, creating a spectacle that would have been impressive to any observer unfamiliar with the ways of true prophecy. The din was tremendous, the enthusiasm seemingly genuine, and the message exactly what Ahab longed to hear. Yet as Jehoshaphat watched this display, his spirit grew troubled. Something about the performance felt hollow, manufactured. These men spoke with one voice, but it was not the voice of the Lord that Jehoshaphat knew from his own times of prayer and seeking. There was no cost to their prophecy, no challenge to the king's desires, no hint of the divine complexity that marked true encounters with the Almighty. As the prophets continued their enthusiastic proclamations, Jehoshaphat raised his hand for silence. The courtyard gradually quieted, though the echo of their shouts seemed to linger in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "Is there not here a prophet of the Lord besides these?" Jehoshaphat asked carefully, "that we might inquire of him?" The question fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the assembly. Ahab's face darkened, and several of the court prophets exchanged meaningful glances. They all knew there was indeed another prophet, one whose very existence was a thorn in the flesh of everyone present. Ahab's response came through gritted teeth, his voice barely concealing his irritation. "There is still one man, Micaiah the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord, but I hate him, for he does not prophesy good concerning me, but evil." The honesty of Ahab's admission was startling in its nakedness. Here was a king openly declaring his hatred for a prophet based not on any moral failing or false prophecy, but simply because the man refused to tell him what he wanted to hear. It was a moment that revealed the true spiritual state of Israel's leadership. Jehoshaphat, ever the diplomat, sought to smooth over the awkward moment. "Let not the king say such things," he replied gently, though his words carried a subtle rebuke. Ahab realized he had revealed too much of his heart. With visible effort he composed himself and called for one of his officers. "Bring Micaiah the son of Imlah quickly," he commanded, though his tone suggested he would rather summon a plague upon his house. As the officer hurried away on his grim errand, the two kings settled in to wait. The 400 prophets remained in the courtyard, their earlier enthusiasm now tempered by the knowledge that their unanimous voice was about to be challenged by a single man they both feared and despised. The sun continued its relentless journey across the sky, and in the distance the sound of the officer's horse could be heard galloping toward the place where truth dwelt in isolation, where a forgotten prophet waited in the shadows of his integrity. The horse's hooves struck the dusty road with rhythmic precision as the king's officer rode toward the humble dwelling where Micaiah made his home. The prophet lived simply, far from the luxury of the royal court, in a stone house that spoke of function rather than ostentation. Here, away from the corrupting influence of political power, dwelt a man who had chosen faithfulness over favour, truth over comfort. Micaiah son of Imlah was not an imposing figure by earthly standards. Of average height and lean build, he bore the weathered appearance of one who had walked through many storms. His beard was streaked with silver, and his eyes held the deep weariness of a man who had spoken unpopular truths for too many years. Yet there was something unbreakable in his demeanour, a quality that suggested he had found his anchor in something far stronger than human approval. When the king's messenger arrived, Micaiah was in his garden, tending to the vegetables that provided much of his sustenance. The prophet lived modestly, supported by the occasional gifts of those few souls who still valued truth above comfort. He had long ago learned to find contentment in simple things, the satisfaction of honest work, the peace of prayer, and the quiet joy of communion with the Almighty. "Micaiah," the officer called out as he dismounted, "the king commands your presence immediately." The prophet looked up from his work, unsurprised. He had sensed in recent days that the Lord was preparing him for something significant. His prayers had been marked by an unusual intensity, and his dreams had been filled with visions he did not yet fully understand. "Very well," Micaiah replied simply, setting aside his tools. "Let me wash and prepare myself." As Micaiah went about the task of making himself presentable for the royal court, the officer felt compelled to share information that might save the prophet from making a costly mistake. The man had witnessed what happened to those who crossed King Ahab, and despite his loyalty to the crown, he possessed enough humanity to feel concern for this solitary figure. "Listen to me, Micaiah," the officer said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "The words of the prophets declare good to the king with one mouth. Let your word be like the word of one of them, and speak favourably." It was well-intentioned advice, offered by a man who understood the political realities of Ahab's court. The officer had seen the 400 prophets deliver their unanimous message of victory and prosperity. He knew that Micaiah's reputation for speaking uncomfortable truths could lead to imprisonment, exile, or worse. In his mind, he was offering the prophet a lifeline, a chance to align himself with the majority and avoid the consequences of standing alone. Micaiah paused in his preparations, considering the messenger's words. The offer was clear: conform, agree with the crowd, tell the king what he wants to hear, and enjoy the benefits of royal favour. It would be so easy, so practical, so utterly reasonable by every human measure. But as Micaiah looked into the officer's earnest face, he felt the familiar stirring of the spirit within him, that unmistakable presence that had guided him through decades of faithful service. The Lord had not called him to an easy path, but he had never failed to provide strength for the journey. "As the Lord lives," Micaiah replied with quiet dignity, "whatever the Lord says to me, that I will speak." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration of absolute commitment that left no room for compromise. The officer's face showed his disappointment and concern, but he knew better than to argue further. He had delivered his warning. What the prophet did with it was beyond his control. The journey back to Samaria was made in relative silence, the officer pondering the stubborn integrity of his passenger, while Micaiah prayed and prepared his heart for whatever lay ahead. As they approached the city, the prophet could see the banners of both Israel and Judah flying from the palace walls, confirming his suspicion that this summons involved more than a routine consultation. The palace courtyard was a scene of controlled chaos when they arrived. Servants scurried about preparing for what appeared to be an important gathering, while guards stood at attention in their finest armour. The 400 prophets were still present, clustered in small groups and speaking in hushed tones. Their earlier enthusiasm had given way to a more subdued attitude, though their confidence in their message remained unshaken. As Micaiah dismounted and followed the officer toward the throne room, he could feel the weight of many eyes upon him. Some looks were curious, others hostile, and a few held the barely concealed contempt of those who viewed his independence as a personal affront. He had grown accustomed to such reactions over the years, understanding that his very presence served as an uncomfortable reminder of the spiritual compromise that permeated the court. The great doors opened before them, revealing the opulent throne room where Kings Ahab and Jehoshaphat waited. The contrast between the two rulers was immediately apparent even to a casual observer. Ahab sat upon his throne with the restless energy of a man driven by ambition, his fingers drumming impatiently on the armrest. Jehoshaphat, seated in a chair of equal honour nearby, maintained the composed dignity of one accustomed to seeking divine guidance before making important decisions. "Ah, Micaiah," Ahab said as the prophet entered, his tone carrying forced joviality that fooled no one. "At last, our final consultant arrives." Micaiah approached the throne with measured steps, neither hurrying to show deference nor dawdling to display defiance. He had learned long ago that in the presence of earthly power, his allegiance belonged to a higher authority. When he reached the appropriate distance, he bowed respectfully but not obsequiously, acknowledging the king's position without compromising his own integrity. "You summoned me, your majesty," Micaiah said simply, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. King Jehoshaphat studied the prophet with interest. He had heard reports of Micaiah's reputation for uncompromising honesty, and after witnessing the theatrical performance of the 400 prophets, he was eager to hear from someone who might offer a different perspective. Ahab leaned forward on his throne, his eyes fixed on the solitary figure before him. "Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth-Gilead, or shall we refrain?" It was the same question that had been posed to the 400 prophets, the same inquiry that had produced such enthusiastic unanimity. Now it fell upon the shoulders of one man who stood alone, without allies or supporters, facing the combined expectation of two kings and their assembled courts. The moment stretched taut with anticipation. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something significant, though few could have predicted the drama that was about to unfold. In the silence, Micaiah felt the familiar stirring of the Spirit, but what came first was not the word of the Lord, but something altogether unexpected. What happened next would be remembered and debated for generations to come. Micaiah, the prophet known for his uncompromising honesty, looked directly at King Ahab and delivered exactly the message the king wanted to hear. "Go up and prosper," Micaiah declared, his voice carrying throughout the throne room, "for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled court. The 400 prophets exchanged glances of confusion and perhaps a touch of irritation. Here was the man they had feared would contradict their unanimous verdict, and instead he was confirming their prophecy word for word. Some of them smiled with what they imagined was vindication, while others seemed puzzled by this unexpected development. But King Ahab was no fool. Despite his many moral failings, he had known Micaiah for years, had heard his prophecies of judgment and warning countless times. Never once had the prophet told him what he wanted to hear. Never once had Micaiah's words aligned so perfectly with royal desires. The king's eyes narrowed as he studied the prophet's face, searching for the truth behind this suspicious compliance. There was something in Micaiah's tone, a subtle quality that suggested layers beneath the surface of his words. It was the same tone a parent might use when agreeing with a child's obviously foolish plan, allowing them to proceed while knowing full well what the consequences would be. King Jehoshaphat, too, sensed that something was amiss, though he remained silent, observing the interaction with keen interest. "How many times shall I make you swear," Ahab said slowly, his voice carrying a warning, "that you tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" It was a remarkable moment. Here was a king who had just received exactly the prophecy he desired, yet his own conscience convicted him that it could not be genuine. Ahab understood Micaiah well enough to know that such easy agreement was completely out of character. In demanding the truth, the king was inadvertently acknowledging that he recognized the difference between authentic prophecy and the comfortable lies he typically preferred. Micaiah stood silent for a moment, and those watching could see a visible change come over him. The sardonic expression faded from his face, replaced by the solemn countenance of one who was about to deliver a message from the throne room of heaven. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality altogether, the unmistakable authority of divine revelation. "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep that have no shepherd," Micaiah began, his words falling like stones into the sudden silence. "And the Lord said, 'These have no master. Let each return to his house in peace.'" The impact of these words was immediate and devastating. The vision was clear to everyone present. Israel would be defeated, their army scattered, and their king would not return from battle. It was a prophecy of military disaster and royal death, delivered with the calm certainty of one who had seen beyond the veil of earthly circumstances. King Ahab's face flushed with anger, but beneath the rage was something that looked remarkably like fear. He turned to Jehoshaphat with the bitter satisfaction of one whose worst expectations have been confirmed. "Did I not tell you," Ahab said, his voice heavy with frustration, "that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil?" But Micaiah was not finished. The Spirit of the Lord had opened his eyes to see into the very council chambers of heaven, and what he had witnessed there needed to be shared, regardless of the consequences. The prophet's voice took on an even more solemn tone as he continued. "Therefore hear the word of the Lord," Micaiah declared, his words cutting through the tension in the room like a sword. "I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing by, on his right hand and on his left." The court fell absolutely silent. Even the most worldly and cynical among them recognized that they were hearing something extraordinary. This was not the political manoeuvring they were accustomed to, nor the comfortable reassurances of the court prophets. This was a glimpse into eternal realities, a revelation of divine purpose that transcended human understanding. "And the Lord said," Micaiah continued, "Who will persuade Ahab to go up, that he may fall at Ramoth-Gilead?" So one spoke in this manner, and another spoke in that manner. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, "I will persuade him." The Lord said to him, "In what way?" And he said, "I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And the Lord said, "You shall persuade him, and also prevail. Go out and do so." The revelation was staggering in its implications. Micaiah was claiming that the Lord himself had allowed, indeed, had orchestrated, the deception that had been proclaimed by the 400 prophets. It was a divine judgment in the form of false prophecy, a spiritual trap set for a king who had repeatedly chosen lies over truth. Therefore, Micaiah concluded with inexorable logic, "Look, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets of yours, and the Lord has declared disaster concerning you." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person present was forced to grapple with the implications of what they had heard. The 400 prophets found themselves accused not merely of error, but of being unwitting instruments of divine deception. The kings faced the terrifying possibility that their carefully planned military campaign was actually a trap set by the Almighty himself. But the silence was short-lived. Zedekiah, the spokesman for the 400 prophets, was a man of considerable pride and ambition. He had built his reputation on his supposed connection to the divine, and Micaiah's words threatened not only his credibility but his entire worldview. The accusation that he had been deceived by a lying spirit was more than he could bear. With a roar of rage, Zedekiah strode across the throne room until he stood face to face with Micaiah. The contrast between them was striking. Zedekiah in his fine robes and carefully groomed appearance, representing the comfortable religiosity of the court, facing Micaiah in his simple garments, embodying the uncompromising voice of authentic prophecy. "Which way did the Spirit from the Lord go from me to speak to you?" Zedekiah demanded, his voice shaking with fury. It was a desperate attempt to challenge Micaiah's authority, to suggest that if anyone possessed a connection to the divine, it was surely the spokesman for 400 prophets rather than this isolated troublemaker. But before Micaiah could respond, Zedekiah's anger overwhelmed his judgment entirely. The sound of the slap echoed through the throne room like a thunderclap. Zedekiah had struck Micaiah across the face with sufficient force to stagger the prophet, leaving a red mark on his cheek that would serve as a visible reminder of what it cost to speak truth in the face of comfortable lies. The act of violence hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. No one moved or spoke, shocked by the sudden transition from theological debate to physical assault. Micaiah slowly straightened, touching his cheek where Zedekiah's hand had left its mark. When he looked up, there was no anger in his eyes, no desire for retaliation. Instead, there was a sadness that seemed to encompass not only his immediate situation, but the entire spiritual state of the nation. "Indeed," Micaiah said quietly, his voice carrying despite its gentle tone, "you shall see on that day when you go into an inner chamber to hide." It was both prophecy and promise. The day would come when Zedekiah's false confidence would crumble, when the reality of divine judgment would force him to seek shelter from the consequences of his deception. The words carried the weight of inevitable fulfillment, spoken not in anger, but with the sorrowful certainty of one who had seen the future and found it tragic. King Ahab had heard enough. The prophet's words had struck too close to uncomfortable truths, had challenged too directly the comfortable illusions upon which he had built his reign. The vision of divine deception, the prophecy of military disaster, the humiliating suggestion that his 400 prophets were unwitting instruments of judgment, all of it combined to create a rage that demanded immediate action. "Take Micaiah," the king commanded, his voice sharp with fury, "and return him to Amon, the governor of the city, and to Joash the king's son, and say, 'Thus says the king, put this fellow in prison, and feed him with bread of affliction and water of affliction until I come in peace.'" The order was both punishment and insurance policy. By imprisoning Micaiah until his safe return from battle, Ahab was attempting to nullify the prophecy through royal decree. It was a desperate act of defiance against divine judgment, a futile attempt to bind the word of the Lord with chains and prison walls. But Micaiah was not finished. Even as the guards moved toward him, even as the shadow of imprisonment fell across his path, the prophet had one final word to speak. His voice rang out across the throne room with the clarity of absolute conviction. "If you ever return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me." The words were a direct challenge to royal authority, a public declaration that put Micaiah's credibility as a prophet on the line. He was essentially saying that if Ahab returned safely from battle, then everyone present should conclude that Micaiah was a false prophet deserving of death. It was the ultimate expression of confidence in the word he had received from the Lord. But Micaiah was not content to let his challenge rest with the immediate audience. Looking around the throne room at the assembled courtiers, nobles and servants, he raised his voice even louder. "Mark it, all you people." It was a call to witness, an appeal to everyone present to remember this moment and test the validity of his prophecy against future events. The prophet was willing to stake everything, his reputation, his freedom, possibly his life, on the truth of what he had spoken. It was a level of certainty that transcended human confidence and entered the realm of divine assurance. As the guards seized Micaiah's arms and began to lead him away, the throne room erupted in a buzz of conversation. Some whispered among themselves about the prophet's boldness, others debated the implications of his vision, and still others tried to process the dramatic confrontation they had just witnessed. Through it all, the 400 prophets maintained their uncomfortable silence, uncertain how to respond to accusations that struck at the very heart of their prophetic claims. King Jehoshaphat watched the proceedings with deep concern. The righteous king of Judah had requested divine counsel, and what he had received was a prophecy that directly contradicted his military plans and predicted disaster for his ally. Yet something in Micaiah's bearing, some quality of authentic conviction, made it impossible to dismiss his words as the ravings of a madman or the spite of a disgruntled prophet. As Micaiah was led away, his footsteps echoing through the palace corridors, he felt no bitterness toward his captors or self-pity for his situation. He had spoken the word of the Lord faithfully, regardless of the consequences, and that obedience brought a peace that transcended his circumstances. The prison cell that awaited him might confine his body, but his spirit remained free, anchored in the unshakable certainty that he had been faithful to his calling. The cell where Micaiah was imprisoned was a far cry from the luxury of the royal court. Built of rough stone with a small barred window that provided minimal light, it was designed for punishment rather than comfort. The bread of affliction and water of affliction promised by the king proved to be exactly that. Meagre rations calculated to sustain life, while providing a constant reminder of a royal displeasure. Yet in that dark cell, Micaiah found something that had eluded him in the freedom of his simple home. Absolute clarity about his purpose and calling. Stripped of all earthly comforts and securities, he was forced to rely entirely upon his relationship with the Lord. In the long hours of solitude, he prayed not for deliverance but for continued faithfulness, not for vindication, but for grace to endure whatever lay ahead. Meanwhile, preparations for war continued with increasing intensity. King Ahab threw himself into military planning with the fervour of a man trying to drown out unwelcome voices of conscience. He consulted with his generals, inspected his troops, and made elaborate arrangements for what he was determined would be a glorious victory. The prophecy of the 400 court prophets was repeated frequently, as if constant repetition could somehow make it more reliable. King Jehoshaphat, however, found himself deeply troubled by the day's events. The contrast between the theatrical unanimity of the 400 prophets and Micaiah's stark authenticity had left him with serious doubts about the wisdom of the planned campaign. Yet he had given his word to stand with Ahab, and the political implications of backing out now were significant. As the day of departure approached, Ahab made one final attempt to circumvent the prophecy that haunted his thoughts. If the word of the Lord through Micaiah was true, then King Ahab was destined to die in battle. But perhaps, the king reasoned, he could outwit divine judgment through human cleverness. "I will disguise myself and go into battle," Ahab announced to his commanders, "but you put on your robes." It was a cunning plan. By dressing as an ordinary soldier while Jehoshaphat wore royal garments, Ahab hoped to deceive the enemy about his identity and location. If the Syrians could not identify him as the king of Israel, perhaps he could survive the battle and prove Micaiah wrong. It was the kind of tactical thinking that had served Ahab well in political manoeuvring, but he was about to discover that divine judgment operates by different rules than human conflict. The morning of battle dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the plains surrounding Ramoth Gilead. It seemed an unlikely day for the fulfillment of prophecy, too beautiful for the tragic events that were about to unfold. The armies of Israel and Judah had assembled in impressive formation, their banners flying proudly in the morning air, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. King Ahab, disguised as a common soldier, moved among his troops with nervous energy. His royal armour had been replaced with the simple leather and bronze of an ordinary warrior, and his distinctive crown was nowhere to be seen. To any casual observer, he appeared to be merely another commander preparing for battle, yet those closest to him could sense his underlying anxiety, the tension of a man who was trying to outrun a divine decree. King Jehoshaphat, meanwhile, wore his royal robes with obvious reluctance. The righteous king of Judah had agreed to this deception as part of their military strategy, but his conscience troubled him. The memory of Micaiah's words weighed heavily on his mind, and he found himself offering frequent prayers for divine protection and guidance. The Syrian army was formidable, well-trained and confident in their ability to defend their territory. Their king had given specific instructions to his 32 chariot commanders: fight with no one small or great, but only with the king of Israel. It was a strategic decision based on the understanding that killing or capturing the enemy king would effectively end the battle and secure victory. As the two armies faced each other across the field of battle, the air was thick with tension and anticipation. Horses stamped impatiently, armour creaked as soldiers shifted their weight, and commanders made final adjustments to their battle plans. In the distance, the walls of Ramoth Gilead stood as silent witness to the conflict that was about to determine its fate. The battle began with the thunderous clash of armies colliding, the sound of metal against metal mixing with the shouts of warriors and the screams of the wounded. Chariots raced across the battlefield like instruments of divine wrath, their wheels churning up clouds of dust that obscured vision and added to the chaos of combat. For a time, it seemed as though Ahab's strategy might succeed. Hidden among his soldiers, the disguised king fought with the desperation of a man who believed his life depended on remaining unrecognized. His years of military experience served him well as he wielded sword and spear with deadly efficiency, contributing to the initial success of the Israelite forces. But the Syrian chariot commanders were not easily deceived. When they spotted King Jehoshaphat in his royal robes, they immediately assumed they had found their primary target. A group of them converged on the king of Judah with deadly intent, their chariots cutting through the battle lines like ships through stormy seas. "Surely it is the king of Israel," they shouted to one another as they closed in on Jehoshaphat. The king of Judah found himself surrounded by enemy chariots, their occupants preparing to capture or kill what they believed to be their primary objective. In that moment of extreme danger, Jehoshaphat did what he had learned to do throughout his reign. He cried out to the Lord for deliverance. "Help me, O Lord," Jehoshaphat called out, his voice carrying above the din of battle. What happened next was a clear demonstration of divine intervention. As Jehoshaphat's cry reached heaven, the Lord moved the hearts of the Syrian commanders in an unexpected way. Something about the king's appearance or manner suddenly convinced them that this was not their intended target after all. "It is not the king of Israel," one of them declared, and just as quickly as they had converged upon Jehoshaphat, they turned away to search for their real quarry elsewhere on the battlefield. Meanwhile, across the chaos of combat, King Ahab continued his desperate masquerade. His disguise had served him well throughout the morning, allowing him to participate in the battle without attracting the special attention of enemy forces. For a brief moment, it seemed as though human cunning might indeed triumph over divine decree. But the Lord's purposes are not thwarted by earthly schemes, no matter how cleverly conceived. As the battle raged on, a Syrian soldier drew his bow at random, not aiming at any particular target, but simply shooting into the mass of enemy forces. It was the kind of arrow that soldiers loose when they cannot see clearly, through the dust and confusion of battle, hoping to strike something useful, but with no specific intent. The arrow flew through the air with the invisible guidance of divine providence. It passed over the heads of common soldiers, sailed between the wheels of racing chariots, and found its mark with the precision of perfect justice. The bronze point struck King Ahab between the joints of his armour, penetrating the one gap in his defences that his disguise could not protect. The king felt the arrow's impact like a thunderbolt, the sudden, sharp pain followed by the warm spread of blood across his chest. He looked down in shock to see the Syrian arrow protruding from his body, its shaft trembling with the force of impact. In that instant, Ahab understood with perfect clarity that no amount of human cleverness could circumvent the word of the Lord. "I am wounded," the king cried out to his chariot driver, his voice tight with pain and the dawning realization of his doom. "Turn around and carry me out of the battle." The chariot driver, a loyal servant who had recognized his disguised king despite the common soldier's garb, immediately began maneuvering toward the edge of the battlefield. But extricating themselves from the chaos of combat proved more difficult than anticipated. The battle had intensified throughout the day, and enemy forces blocked many of the potential escape routes. As they struggled to retreat, King Ahab's condition continued to deteriorate. The arrow had found a vital spot, and blood flowed freely from the wound despite his attempts to stanch it. Yet with grim determination, the king remained propped up in his chariot, unwilling to let his army see him fall. His presence, even in his wounded state, served to encourage the Israelite forces and maintain their fighting spirit. The battle raged from morning until evening, the outcome hanging in the balance as both sides fought with desperate intensity. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red that seemed to mirror the blood spilled on the battlefield below, King Ahab's strength finally gave out. The disguised king who had tried to outwit divine judgment slumped forward in his chariot, his life ebbing away with each laboured breath. As word of the king's condition spread through the ranks, the cry went up that would fulfill Micaiah's prophecy with devastating accuracy. Every man to his city, and every man to his own country. The army of Israel, leaderless and demoralized, began to scatter across the hills just as the prophet had foreseen. Like sheep without a shepherd, they abandoned their positions and fled toward home, their dreams of victory dissolving into the nightmare of defeat. King Ahab died as the sun set over Ramoth-Gilead, his blood pooling in the bottom of his chariot. The man who had spent his reign choosing comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths had finally encountered a reality that no amount of deception could alter. The word of the Lord, spoken through his faithful prophet, had been fulfilled to the letter. News of King Ahab's death spread quickly through the land, carried by the scattered remnants of his army and the merchants who followed military campaigns. In the palace at Samaria, the reaction was one of stunned disbelief. The 400 prophets who had proclaimed certain victory found themselves facing a crisis of credibility that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In his prison cell, Micaiah heard the news with a mixture of sadness and vindication. He had taken no pleasure in prophesying disaster, had felt no joy in predicting the death of his king. Yet the fulfillment of his prophecy served as a powerful reminder that the word of the Lord does not return void, regardless of how unwelcome it might be to human ears. When the guards came to release him from prison, Micaiah emerged into the daylight a changed man. His body bore the marks of his confinement. He was thinner, paler, and bore the lines of one who had endured hardship. But his spirit was unbroken, perhaps even strengthened by his ordeal. He had spoken truth in the face of overwhelming opposition, had maintained his integrity under pressure, and had been vindicated by the very events that had brought tragedy to the kingdom. The political ramifications of Ahab's death were immediate and far-reaching. His son Ahaziah ascended to the throne, inheriting a kingdom shaken by military defeat and spiritual confusion. The influence of Queen Jezebel remained strong, but the dramatic fulfillment of Micaiah's prophecy had dealt a severe blow to the credibility of the Baal-worshipping establishment. Zedekiah, the false prophet who had struck Micaiah in the throne room, found himself in an impossible position. His confident predictions of victory had been thoroughly discredited, and his authority as a spokesman for the divine had been shattered. The inner chamber where he sought to hide, just as Micaiah had prophesied, became both a physical and spiritual reality as he struggled to come to terms with the magnitude of his error. The other court prophets faced similar crises of confidence. Their unanimous declaration of victory had been revealed as the lying spirit Micaiah had warned about, and their reputations lay in ruins. Some of them quietly retired from public life, while others attempted to reinvent themselves as followers of different deities. None of them could escape the uncomfortable truth that they had been deceived, and had, in turn, deceived others. King Jehoshaphat returned to Jerusalem a wiser and more cautious man. His alliance with Ahab had nearly cost him his life, and the experience had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of seeking genuine divine guidance rather than accepting comfortable confirmations of predetermined plans. The prophet Jehu, son of Hanani, met him upon his return with words of rebuke for his alliance with the ungodly king, but also with recognition that the Lord had delivered him from the consequences of his poor judgment. Throughout the kingdom, people began to reassess their understanding of prophecy and divine revelation. The dramatic contrast between the false assurances of the 400 prophets and the accurate warnings of the solitary Micaiah had provided a vivid lesson in discernment. Many began to understand that true prophecy was not measured by its popularity or its agreement with human desires, but by its faithfulness to the word and character of the Lord. Years passed, and the story of Micaiah's stand against the 400 false prophets became one of the most remembered episodes in the history of Israel. Parents told it to their children as an example of courage and integrity, while religious teachers used it to illustrate the difference between true and false prophecy. The tale grew in significance with each telling, not because it was embellished, but because its lessons proved to be timeless and universal. The first and most obvious lesson was about the cost of speaking truth. Micaiah had paid a heavy price for his faithfulness: imprisonment, isolation, and the hostility of the powerful. Yet his willingness to endure these hardships had ultimately served a greater purpose, preserving the integrity of prophetic ministry and providing a clear example of what it meant to fear God rather than man. His story became a source of encouragement for future generations of prophets and faithful believers who found themselves standing alone against popular opinion. The second lesson concerned the danger of groupthink and manufactured consensus. The 400 prophets had created an impressive display of unanimity, but their agreement had been based on political expediency rather than divine revelation. Their story served as a warning about the seductive power of majority opinion and the importance of seeking truth, even when it contradicted popular sentiment. The comfort of belonging to the crowd, they learned, was no substitute for the sometimes lonely path of authentic faith. The third lesson was perhaps the most theologically complex: the reality that God sometimes allows deception as a form of judgment. The lying spirit that had influenced the false prophets was not an independent force, but an instrument of divine justice, permitted by the Lord as part of his sovereign plan. This aspect of the story forced believers to grapple with difficult questions about the nature of divine sovereignty and human responsibility, helping them develop a more mature understanding of how God works in the world. The fourth lesson focused on the importance of discernment in spiritual matters. King Jehoshaphat's initial uneasiness with the 400 prophets had been a manifestation of spiritual discernment, a recognition that something was amiss despite the impressive display of consensus. His request for a prophet of the Lord had demonstrated the value of seeking authentic divine guidance rather than accepting convenient confirmations of predetermined plans. The fifth lesson was about the ultimate futility of human schemes when they oppose divine purposes. King Ahab's elaborate disguise had been a clever attempt to circumvent prophecy through human ingenuity, but it had proven utterly useless against the sovereign will of the Lord. The random arrow that found its mark had served as a powerful reminder that God's purposes will be accomplished regardless of human attempts to thwart them. As the years passed and the kingdom of Israel continued its spiritual decline, the story of Micaiah took on additional significance. It became a benchmark against which other prophets and prophecies were measured, a reminder of what authentic faithfulness looked like in the face of opposition. When Elijah stood alone against the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, people remembered Micaiah's solitary stand. When Jeremiah faced persecution for his unpopular messages, the example of Micaiah's courage provided encouragement and precedent. The story also served as a cautionary tale for those in positions of authority. King Ahab's admission that he hated Micaiah because the prophet never spoke favourably about him had revealed the dangerous tendency of leaders to surround themselves with yes men rather than truthful counsellors. Future kings and officials who heard the story were challenged to examine their own relationships with advisors and to consider whether they were seeking truth or merely confirmation of their existing beliefs. In the quiet of his later years, Micaiah often reflected on that pivotal day when he had stood alone before 2 kings and 400 false prophets. The physical scars from his imprisonment had faded, but the spiritual impact of his experience continued to shape his understanding of his calling and his relationship with the Lord. The prophet had learned that faithfulness was not measured by immediate results, but by obedience to divine instruction. His warning had not prevented the battle or saved King Ahab's life, but it had preserved the integrity of prophetic ministry and provided a clear demonstration of the difference between true and false revelation. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest victories were won not through changing circumstances, but through maintaining faithfulness in the midst of difficult circumstances. Micaiah had also discovered that standing alone was not the same as being alone. In his prison cell, deprived of human companionship and comfort, he had experienced a deeper intimacy with the Lord than he had ever known before. The isolation that had seemed like punishment had actually become a pathway to greater spiritual understanding and strength. He had learned that the approval of the crowd was a poor substitute for the approval of the Almighty. The prophet had come to understand that his role was not to be popular, but to be faithful, not to tell people what they wanted to hear, but to speak what the Lord had given him to say. This understanding had freed him from the burden of trying to manage people's reactions to his messages, and had allowed him to focus entirely on the sacred responsibility of accurate communication of divine truth. The peace that came from this clarity of purpose was worth more than all the royal favour he might have gained through compromise. As news of Micaiah's faithfulness spread beyond the borders of Israel, his story began to influence other nations and cultures. Foreign dignitaries who visited the kingdom often asked to hear the account of the prophet who had stood against 400 false prophets and accurately predicted the death of a king. The story became a testament to the power of truth and the importance of moral courage, inspiring people of various backgrounds to examine their own commitments to integrity and faithfulness. The story also had a profound impact on the understanding of prophecy itself. Future generations would use Micaiah's example as a standard for evaluating prophetic claims, recognizing that true prophecy was characterized by faithfulness to the Lord's character and purposes rather than by popular appeal or immediate gratification. The account helped establish criteria for distinguishing between authentic divine revelation and human manipulation disguised as spiritual authority. In the broader context of Israel's history, Micaiah's stand represented a crucial moment in the preservation of true worship and authentic faith. At a time when the kingdom was sliding towards spiritual apostasy, his unwavering commitment to truth served as a beacon of hope for those who still sought to follow the Lord with integrity. His example encouraged other faithful believers to maintain their convictions even when they seemed to be in the minority. The story of Micaiah also served as a bridge between the ministries of the earlier prophets like Elijah and later ones like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. His experience of standing alone against popular opinion and suffering for his faithfulness would be echoed in the lives of many subsequent prophets who face similar challenges. The patterns of persecution, vindication, and ultimate triumph that characterized his story became recurring themes in the ongoing narrative of God's relationship with his people. As we reach the end of Micaiah's story, we find ourselves confronted with questions that transcend the ancient world and speak directly to our modern hearts. In an age of social media echo chambers and manufactured consensus, the prophet's example challenges us to examine our own commitment to truth and our willingness to stand alone when necessary. The 400 false prophets of Micaiah's day have their counterparts in every generation. Those who tell us what we want to hear rather than what we need to hear, who offer comfortable lies instead of challenging truths. The temptation to join the crowd, to find safety in numbers, to seek approval rather than accuracy, remains as strong today as it was in ancient Israel. Micaiah's courage reminds us that faithfulness is not a group activity, but an individual responsibility. Each of us must decide whether we will speak truth or remain silent, whether we will stand for what is right or compromise for what is convenient. The prophet's example shows us that the path of integrity is often lonely, but it is never walked alone by those who trust in the Lord. The story also challenges us to examine our own relationship with authority and our tendency to surround ourselves with people who confirm our existing beliefs rather than challenging us to grow. Like King Ahab, we may find ourselves preferring the comfort of familiar lies to the discomfort of unfamiliar truths. Micaiah's example calls us to seek out voices that speak with authenticity, rather than those that merely echo our own opinions. Perhaps most importantly, the story of Micaiah reminds us that truth has a way of prevailing in the end, even when it seems overwhelmed by opposition. The prophet's vindication did not come immediately, and it came at great personal cost, but it came nonetheless. His example encourages us to trust in the ultimate triumph of truth, and to remain faithful even when the outcome is uncertain. In our own lives, we may face moments when we are called to be like Micaiah, to stand alone against popular opinion, to speak uncomfortable truths, to choose faithfulness over favour. When those moments come, may we remember the forgotten prophet who found his courage not in the approval of men, but in the approval of his God. The story of Micaiah teaches us that true strength is not found in numbers, but in conviction, that real courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right despite our fears, and that lasting victory comes not from avoiding conflict, but from maintaining integrity in the midst of it. As you close your eyes tonight and drift towards sleep, may you carry with you the quiet courage of Micaiah, the man who dared to stand alone because he knew he was not truly alone. May his example inspire you to speak truth with love, to stand for what is right with humility, and to trust in the ultimate triumph of God's purposes even when the immediate circumstances seem overwhelming. In a world that often rewards conformity and punishes authenticity, may you find the strength to be like Micaiah, faithful, courageous, and true. For in the end, it is not the approval of the crowd that matters, but the approval of the one who sees all hearts and knows all truths. The forgotten prophet's story ends, but its echo continues in every heart that chooses truth over comfort, courage over convenience, and faithfulness over favour. May that echo sound clearly in your own life, guiding you toward the kind of integrity that leaves a lasting legacy long after the voices of the crowd have faded into silence. Rest well, dear friends, and may your dreams be filled with the peace that comes from knowing you serve a God who honours faithfulness, rewards courage, and never abandons those who trust in him. The story of Micaiah reminds us that in God's kingdom, standing alone with truth is always better than standing with the crowd in deception. Sleep peacefully, knowing that like Micaiah, you're never truly alone when you walk in the light of divine truth. Hey there, peaceful soul. Before we begin tonight's gentle journey through Scripture, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from right now and what time it is in your corner of creation. Please leave a comment below sharing this. It's always such a blessing to see how God's Word brings rest to hearts across every time zone. And if tonight's story brings you peace, please consider subscribing to Sacred Rest for more Scripture-based sleep stories delivered with calm, unhurried care. Now take a deep breath and let's rest in God's presence. The Sea of Galilee rested in quiet splendour as the day's light began its gentle retreat toward the horizon. Golden rays stretched across the water's surface, dancing and shimmering as if heaven itself had scattered coins across the deep. It had been a full day, a day when crowds pressed in from every direction, hungry for wisdom, for healing, for a glimpse of this man who spoke as no one had spoken before. Jesus had been teaching since morning, his voice carrying across the gathered multitudes. He spoke of seeds falling on different soils, of tiny mustard seeds growing into sheltering trees, of hidden treasures and precious pearls. The kingdom of heaven, he said, was like these things, sometimes hidden, always valuable, growing in ways the human eye might miss. His words were simple yet profound, accessible yet mysterious, and the crowds hung on every syllable. But even the Son of God wrapped in human flesh grew weary. As the sun began its descent, Jesus looked out at his disciples with eyes that held both exhaustion and purpose. "Let us go over to the other side," he said simply. No fanfare accompanied these words, no dramatic declaration, just a quiet invitation to cross the sea. This is where our meditation begins tonight, with this small, seemingly unremarkable statement. Let us go over to the other side. 5 ordinary words that carried extraordinary meaning. For when Jesus says, "Let us go," he already knows what lies ahead. The storm that would soon rage was not a surprise to him. The fear that would grip his disciples' hearts was already known. The peace he would speak was already prepared. The disciples, eager to follow their teacher wherever he led, began to prepare the boat. Some of them were fishermen by trade, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Their hands calloused and strong from years of casting nets and pulling oars. They knew this sea intimately, had crossed its waters countless times. This evening crossing seemed unremarkable to them, simply another journey in their extraordinary adventure with this remarkable man. Other followers bid Jesus and the disciples farewell from the shore, perhaps still pondering the parables they had heard throughout the day. The kingdom of heaven is like... These words would linger in their hearts as they returned to their homes, planting seeds of truth that would grow in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As the boat pushed away from shore, Jesus settled into the stern. A small cushion was placed there, nothing luxurious, just a simple comfort for the teacher's rest. Several of the disciples took up the oars, their strong arms working in rhythmic unison to guide the vessel forward. Others perhaps sat quietly, watching the shoreline recede or gazing up at the vast canvas of sky that was beginning to transition from azure blue to deepening indigo. The evening air was cool against their skin, a welcome relief after the heat of the day. Birds wheeled overhead, their silhouettes dark against the warming colours of sunset. Fish occasionally broke the surface of the water, creating ripples that expanded outward in perfect circles. All seemed peaceful, all seemed well. Jesus, his body surrendering to weariness, closed his eyes. The gentle rocking of the boat, the quiet splash of water against its sides, the distant calls of birds, these formed a lullaby that invited rest. And so he slept, his head resting on the cushion, his breath falling into the deep, steady rhythm of slumber. The disciples continued their work, some rowing, others perhaps talking quietly among themselves about the day's events. What did the Master mean by this parable or that? How had he known what was in the heart of the Pharisee who had challenged him? Would they truly understand all these mysteries someday, as he had promised? As twilight deepened into dusk, stars began to appear overhead. First one, then dozens, then hundreds, until the sky above was spangled with light. On any other night, this might have been a moment of transcendent beauty, a reminder of God's promise to Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as these very stars. But those with experience on these waters noticed something concerning. The air had changed, becoming charged with an expectancy that seasoned fishermen recognized. A slight shift in the wind's direction, a subtle change in temperature, small signs that spoke volumes to those who knew how to read them. Peter exchanged glances with Andrew, then with James. No words were needed between men who had spent their lives on these waters. Something was coming. The sea, now growing restless beneath them, had secrets to tell. Yet Jesus slept on, his face peaceful in the gathering darkness. Did the disciples consider waking him then, when the first signs appeared? Did they debate among themselves whether to alert their teacher to the changing conditions? We don't know. Perhaps they chose to let him rest, confident in their own abilities to handle whatever came. Perhaps they thought the signs would come to nothing. As the boat continued its journey across the darkening waters, the shoreline they had left grew distant, a thin line of shadow against the night sky. Ahead lay their destination, the country of the Gerasenes, but it remained out of sight, beyond the curve of the horizon. They were in the middle space now, too far from where they had been to return quickly, not yet close enough to where they were going to find shelter. It is in these middle spaces of our lives that storms often find us. Not when we're safely harboured, not when we've reached our destination, but in the vulnerable in-between, in the waiting, in the journeying, in the not yet there. The disciples could not know what lay ahead, but Jesus did. His rest was not the ignorant sleep of one caught unaware, but the peaceful repose of one who knows the end from the beginning. In this, there is profound comfort for us tonight as we rest. Whatever journey we're on, whatever middle space we find ourselves in, Jesus knows. He has already seen what we have not yet encountered. As our minds begin to slow and our bodies relax into this moment of rest, let us picture ourselves in that boat. Feel the gentle rocking beneath you. Hear the quiet splash of water against wood. See the stars appearing one by one in the vast expanse above, and know that Jesus is there with you, perfectly at peace even as the first winds of change begin to stir. It began with a whisper, a subtle change in the rhythm of the night. The stars that had shone so brightly overhead began to disappear, one by one, as clouds moved across the sky like silent spectators gathering for some celestial event. The gentle lapping of water against the sides of the boat grew more insistent, less soothing. The disciples, some of whom may have been drifting towards sleep themselves, grew more alert, their senses heightened by years of experience on these unpredictable waters. The Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Gennesaret or the Sea of Tiberias, sits more than 600 feet below sea level, nestled in a basin surrounded by mountains. This unique geography creates a natural phenomenon well known to local fishermen. When cool air from the Mediterranean Sea, about 30 miles to the west, collides with the hot, humid air over the lake, sudden and violent storms can emerge with startling speed. This night would prove no exception to that natural law. One moment, the disciples were crossing in relative calm. The next, they found themselves battling a windstorm that seemed to descend upon them from nowhere. The Greek word used in Mark's Gospel to describe this storm is leilaps. Not a gentle rain shower or passing breeze, but a furious squall, a tempest of frightening power. The wind began to howl, no longer a whisper but a roar that filled their ears and made conversation nearly impossible. It seized the sail, straining the ropes that secured it, and threatening to tear the fabric from its moorings. Those disciples with seafaring experience would have worked quickly to secure what they could, their hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the growing chaos. Waves rose around them, no longer gentle undulations but angry mountains of water that lifted the boat high before dropping it with stomach-churning speed into the next trough. Water began to break over the sides, soaking the men to their skin and pooling at their feet. In the dim light of whatever lamps they might have had, or perhaps by now extinguished by wind and water, they could see the boat beginning to fill. For modern readers, it might be difficult to fully appreciate the terror of this moment. We who cross oceans in massive ships or fly above the clouds in airplanes may have experienced turbulence or rough seas, but few of us have truly feared for our lives while travelling. These men, however, even those who had spent their lives on the water, understood their mortality with stark clarity in this moment. The boat was filling with water faster than they could bail it out. The wind showed no signs of abating. The shore was nowhere in sight. In the ancient world where swimming was not a commonly taught skill, and where the depths of the sea represented chaos and death, their situation was dire indeed. And Jesus slept on, his head still resting on the cushion in the stern of the boat. This image of Christ sleeping peacefully while chaos rages is one of the most powerful in all of Scripture. There is something almost incongruous about it, something that both confounds and comforts. The disciples must have looked at him with bewilderment. How could anyone sleep through such a storm? Did he not feel the water soaking his garments? Did he not hear the howling wind, or feel the violent pitching of the vessel? Perhaps some of them remembered the words of Psalm 121. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Yet here was their teacher, their master, whom some had begun to believe might be the promised Messiah, deep in slumber while destruction seemed imminent. We might pause here in our meditation and consider times when God has seemed silent or sleeping in our own lives. Those dark nights when prayers appear to go unanswered. Those seasons of suffering when heaven itself seems shut tight. Those moments when we cry out, "Lord, don't you care?" For this was precisely the question that rose to the disciples' lips as fear gave way to desperation. Someone, we don't know who, moved to the stern where Jesus lay sleeping. Perhaps they shook his shoulder roughly, the protocol of respect forgotten in the face of survival's urgency. "Teacher," they cried, their voices barely audible above the storm's rage, "don't you care if we drown?" There is raw humanity in this question, the unfiltered cry of those who feel abandoned in their hour of greatest need. It's not a theologian's careful inquiry or a philosopher's pondering, but the gut-level response of frightened men who cannot understand why the one they've come to trust seems indifferent to their plight. Don't you care? How many times have these words formed in human hearts across the centuries? The parent kneeling by the bed of a suffering child, the widow standing by a fresh grave, the refugee fleeing violence with nothing but the clothes on their back, the addict fighting for sobriety and failing again. Lord, don't you care? It's worth noting that the disciples didn't question Jesus' ability to help. They questioned his concern, his heart. They believed he could do something. Why else wake him? But they wondered if he would. Did their plight move him? Did their fear matter to him? Was he as invested in their well-being as they had come to believe? In asking this question, they revealed something profound about the nature of faith. True faith isn't just believing that God can, it's trusting that God will, that his heart is good, that his love is sure, that his timing is perfect. And this is often where our faith is tested most severely, not in questioning God's power, but in questioning his character, his concern, his care. As we continue to settle into rest tonight, let's acknowledge any storms that may be raging in our own lives. Perhaps there are circumstances that have caused us to wonder if God sees, if God cares. Like the disciples, we may have experienced moments of feeling alone in the tempest, questioning whether our prayers are heard. The beauty of this story, and the comfort it offers us even now, is that Jesus' response to their cry reveals the truth about his heart. But before we explore that response, let's sit for a moment with the reality of the storm itself. Feel the wind's force, hear its howl, see the waves crashing over the sides of the boat, experience the fear, the confusion, the desperate cry for help, and know that in the midst of it all, Jesus is present, not distant, not removed, but right there in the boat with them, with us. Whatever storm we face, we do not face it alone. The Lord of all creation has chosen to journey with us, to be present with us in every turbulent moment and every threatening circumstance. As our breathing deepens and our bodies grow heavier with approaching sleep, let us find comfort in this reality. The presence of Jesus in our boat does not exempt us from storms, but it changes everything about how we experience them. He's here even when he appears to be sleeping. He hears even when he seems silent. And he will respond in his perfect time with his perfect power. Now, as we picture the disciples crowding around Jesus, as we hear their cry of "Don't you care if we drown?" let us watch and see what happens next, for the storm is about to meet its match. The chaos is about to encounter its creator. The winds and waves are about to recognize the voice of the one who called them into being. Jesus woke to the violent pitching of the boat, to the spray of water across his face, to the desperate cries of his disciples. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Their question hung in the air between them, nearly lost in the howling of the wind, yet impossibly loud in its implication. Did he care? Could they truly doubt this? He who had healed the sick, restored sight to the blind, cleansed the lepers, did they think his compassion extended only to strangers and not to those closest to him? He who had called them by name, who had shared meals and long roads and countless conversations with them, did they imagine his heart was indifferent to their fear? Yet Jesus did not respond to their question directly. He did not immediately reassure them of his care or explain his apparent indifference. Instead, he rose, calm, unhurried, sovereign, and turned his attention to the storm itself. Mark's Gospel tells us that he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." The Greek phrase used here, siopa pephimoso, carries the sense of be silent, be muzzled. It is the language one might use to quiet a disruptive animal or silence a disturbing noise. There is authority in these words, command and expectation of immediate obedience, and obey they did. The wind, which had been screaming across the water with destructive force, died away at once. The waves, which had been crashing over the sides of the boat and threatening to sink it, flattened into submission. The entire chaotic scene transformed in an instant from deadly peril to perfect calm. Imagine witnessing this moment. 1 second, you're fighting for your life against one of nature's most terrifying displays of power. The next, you're floating on a sea as smooth as glass under a clearing sky. The contrast would be disorienting, almost unbelievable. The silence following such tumult would ring in your ears. The stillness after such violent motion would leave you feeling strangely weightless. Only then, after demonstrating his authority over creation itself, did Jesus turn back to his disciples, and his words to them were not what they might have expected. No warm reassurance that yes, of course he cared, no gentle understanding of their fear. Instead, he asked them two pointed questions. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? These questions weren't meant to shame or condemn. Jesus was not expressing disappointment so much as issuing an invitation to examine the gap between what they professed to believe about him and how they responded when those beliefs were tested by circumstance. The first question, why are you so afraid, invites examination of the source of our fears. Fear often arises from a perception of threat coupled with a sense of powerlessness to address that threat. The disciples feared drowning because they perceived the storm's power and recognized their inability to control it. But Jesus was suggesting another perspective. When he is in our boat, the equation changes. The presence of the Creator fundamentally alters the balance of power in any situation. The second question, do you still have no faith, probes even deeper. These disciples had witnessed Jesus perform miracle after miracle. They had seen him heal diseases medicine couldn't touch. They had watched him cast out demons that had tormented their victims for years. They had even seen him challenge the religious authorities of their day with an authority that clearly came from above. Yet when the storm came, when their own lives were threatened, their faith faltered. They reverted to fear rather than resting in confidence that the God who had demonstrated his power in so many other circumstances remained just as powerful in their present crisis. This is a common human pattern, isn't it? We can intellectually believe in God's power and love. We can recall times when we've experienced his faithfulness. We can even testify to others about how he has worked in our lives. But when new challenges arise, particularly ones that feel overwhelming or threatening, we can forget everything we know and surrender to panic. Jesus' questions invite a different response. They challenge us to align our emotional reactions with our professed beliefs, to allow what we know about God's character to inform how we feel when facing life's storms. This is not about denying fear. Fear is a natural human emotion that even Jesus experienced in the Garden of Gethsemane. Rather, it's about preventing fear from distorting our view of God and his activity in our lives. The disciples' fear had led them to question Jesus' care for them. Don't you care if we drown? His questions in return invited them to question their fear instead. Was it consistent with what they knew of him? Was it justified in light of who he had revealed himself to be? As we continue our journey toward rest tonight, these questions can guide our own reflection. What fears keep us awake at night? What storms in our lives have made us wonder if God cares? And more importantly, what do we know about the character of Jesus that might speak to those fears? If Jesus is truly who Scripture reveals him to be, all-powerful yet deeply compassionate, sovereign yet intimately involved, holy yet merciful, then our fears must be evaluated in light of these truths. Not dismissed or denied, but placed within the larger context of who God is and how he works. The disciples in that boat had to reconcile their experience of the storm with their experience of Jesus' power over it. We too must reconcile our experience of life's challenges with our understanding of God's character and capabilities. This reconciliation doesn't happen once and for all. It's an ongoing process, a continued growth in trust that develops as we walk with him through both calm seas and raging tempests. Perhaps the most comforting truth in this entire account is the simple reality that Jesus was in the boat with them. He had said, "Let us go over to the other side, you will," not "let me meet you on the other side," or "to try to make it to the other side." When Jesus says, "let us go," he commits to the entire journey, not just the destination. Similarly, when Jesus calls us to follow him, he doesn't promise absence of storms. He doesn't guarantee that the path will be smooth or the journey comfortable. What he does promise is his presence with us in whatever we face. "I am with you always," he would later tell his followers, "to the very end of the age." This presence changes everything. It doesn't always change our circumstances, though sometimes, as in this story, it dramatically does. But it always changes the meaning of those circumstances and how we can respond to them. As we feel sleep drawing nearer, let us rest in this truth. Whatever storm we face, Jesus is in our boat, not as a passive passenger, but as the Lord of wind and wave, the one whose word can transform chaos into calm, the one whose presence transforms our fear into faith. The question Jesus asks, "Why are you so afraid?" isn't meant to dismiss our feelings, but to direct our focus toward the greater reality of his presence and power. The perfect love he embodies casts out fear, not by pretending the storm doesn't exist, but by reminding us that he exists within the storm with us, and that makes all the difference. In the aftermath of the storm's sudden cessation, a profound silence settled over the Sea of Galilee. The only sounds remaining might have been the gentle lapping of now calm waters against the boat's hull, the dripping of seawater from soaked clothing and hair, and perhaps the still rapid breathing of men whose hearts had not yet caught up with the dramatic change in their circumstances. The contrast could not have been more stark. Moments before, chaos had reigned, wind howling, waves crashing, men shouting in fear. Now, perfect stillness surrounded them. The sky was clearing, stars reappearing like hesitant witnesses emerging after danger has passed. The sea, which had threatened to claim their lives, now cradled their boat with gentle care. In this strange new quiet, Jesus' words hung in the air. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" These questions weren't harsh or condemning. They were asked by the same voice that had just commanded the elements and been instantly obeyed. They were spoken by the same lips that had taught multitudes about the kingdom of heaven, that had pronounced forgiveness to the repentant, that had offered living water to the thirsty. His tone may have been one of genuine curiosity rather than criticism, a teacher using a powerful experiential lesson to reveal what was in his students' hearts. The disciples' reaction to this moment is profoundly revealing. Mark tells us that they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." This was a new kind of fear, not the desperate fear of drowning that had gripped them during the storm, but the reverent awe that comes from encountering something, someone, beyond human comprehension. Their question, "Who is this?" is perhaps the most important question any person can ask about Jesus. It's a question that has echoed through centuries across cultures within countless human hearts. Who is this man who spoke with unparalleled authority, who healed with a touch, who forgave sins as if they were his to forgive, and who, as they had just witnessed, commanded the very elements of nature with a word? The disciples had already seen Jesus perform many miracles. They had watched him heal sickness, cast out demons, even restore withered limbs. But this display of power struck them differently, perhaps because it touched so directly on their own expertise. Peter, Andrew, James, John, these were fishermen who had spent their lives on this very sea. They knew its moods and dangers. They had weathered storms before through their own skill and experience. But they had never seen anyone simply speak to a storm and have it obey. Their question reveals something profound about spiritual growth. Revelation comes in layers. We don't grasp the full reality of who Jesus is all at once. Even those who walked with him physically, who ate with him and listened to his teaching daily, came to understand his identity gradually, through accumulated experiences and progressive revelation. This moment on the sea represented a significant shift in their understanding. The Jesus they thought they knew, teacher, healer, friend, suddenly revealed himself to be Lord of creation itself. The one who had been sleeping on a cushion moments before now stood before them as the one who held authority over the very forces of nature. "Who is this?" they asked each other. They were beginning to realize that the answer was far more profound, far more cosmic, far more divine than they had previously imagined. This question invites us into our own reflection tonight. Who is Jesus to us? Is he simply a wise teacher whose moral guidance we appreciate? A historical figure who founded a religion? A comforting presence when life gets difficult? Or is he the sovereign Lord of all creation, whose authority extends over every aspect of our existence, from the largest cosmic forces to the smallest details of our daily lives? Our answer to this question shapes everything about our faith journey. If Jesus is merely a good teacher, then his words are suggestions we can take or leave. If he is simply a historical religious figure, then his relevance to our modern lives may be limited. But if he is who he claimed to be, the Son of God, one with the Father, the Word made flesh, then every word he spoke carries divine authority. Every promise he made is utterly trustworthy, and every command he gave deserves our complete obedience. The disciples in that boat were confronting this reality in a visceral, immediate way. The Jesus they thought they knew had just done something only God could do. The Psalms describe God as the One who stilled the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves. Psalm 65:7, and the one who stilled the storm to a whisper, the waves of the sea were hushed. Psalm 107:29, now they had seen Jesus do exactly this, with their own eyes in their own boat, in response to their own cry for help. Their question, "Who is this?" was not merely rhetorical. It reflected genuine wrestling with an expanding understanding of Jesus' identity. And this wrestling is an essential part of authentic faith. God does not expect us to have perfect theological understanding from the beginning of our journey with him. He reveals himself to us gradually, meeting us where we are and gently expanding our capacity to know him as he truly is. For the disciples, this storm became a classroom, a place where their understanding of Jesus grew deeper and wider. Similarly, the storms of our lives often become the context in which we come to know God more truly. It's relatively easy to affirm God's goodness when life is calm and comfortable. It's when the winds howl and the waves threaten that our true understanding of his character is both revealed and refined. As we continue our journey towards sleep tonight, let's allow this holy question to linger in our minds. Who is this Jesus? Not as an abstract theological inquiry, but as a personal exploration of relationship. Who is he to me? What have I seen him do in my life? How has my understanding of him grown through seasons of both calm and storm? The beauty of this story is that it invites us to know Jesus more fully, not just as a distant miracle worker, but as the one who journeys with us through every circumstance of life. He is in our boat. He may sometimes appear to be sleeping, but he is never absent, never unaware, never unconcerned. And when he speaks, whether to rebuke a storm or to question our fear, his words carry the authority of the one who created all things and holds all things together. The wind and waves recognize his voice, because they came into being through that same voice. All things were created through him and for him, Paul would later write to the Colossians. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Colossians 1:16-15. This is the Jesus who accompanies us through every storm. This is the one who has promised never to leave us or forsake us. This is the Lord who may ask us, as he asked his first disciples, "Why are you so afraid?" Not to shame us for our fear, but to invite us into deeper trust based on deeper knowledge of who he truly is. As our bodies grow heavier with approaching sleep, as our thoughts begin to slow and quiet, let us rest in this profound truth. The one who commands the wind and waves is with us. And if even the storm obeys his voice, how much more can we trust him with the circumstances of our lives, with the fears that sometimes keep us awake, with the future that remains unknown to us but is fully known to him? In this trust, we find not just theological truth, but practical peace, the kind of peace that allows us to rest even when circumstances remain uncertain. Jesus didn't promise his disciples a storm-free journey. He promised them his presence through whatever storms might come. He offers us the same today. Who is this? The disciples asked. The answer to that question continues to unfold for all who choose to journey with him, not in abstract propositions, but in lived experience, in daily walking with the one whose authority extends over every realm and whose love reaches into every heart that opens to receive him. As the boat continued its journey across the now peaceful sea, the disciples must have fallen into a contemplative silence. The question they had asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him," would linger in their hearts and minds for days, weeks, perhaps even years to come. Each time they recalled this night, this storm, this miracle, their understanding of Jesus would deepen a little more. This is often how spiritual growth unfolds for us as well. Not primarily through intellectual study, though that has its place, but through lived experiences that reveal God's character and power in ways that transform our understanding. Head knowledge becomes heart knowledge when we see God act in response to our deepest needs and most desperate prayers. The disciples were beginning to grasp something profound. Jesus was not merely with them, he was over all things. His presence in their boat didn't just mean companionship, it meant protection, provision, and peace that transcended circumstances. Even when he appeared to be sleeping, his sovereignty remained active and absolute. As the first light of dawn began to brighten the eastern sky, they could see their destination approaching, the region of the Gerasenes on the opposite shore of the lake. Jesus had said, "Let us go over to the other side," and despite all that had transpired during the night, they were indeed arriving exactly where he had intended to take them. This small detail carries significant comfort. When Jesus sets a destination, he ensures arrival. The storm, powerful as it was, had not prevented the fulfillment of his stated purpose. It had threatened, certainly. It had frightened the disciples badly. But in the end, it had simply become another opportunity for Jesus to reveal more of himself to those who followed him. This pattern appears throughout Scripture and throughout the lives of those who walk with God. What appears to be a detour or a disaster often becomes the very context in which God manifests his glory most clearly. The storm on the sea, the fiery furnace, the lion's den, the prison cell. In Scripture, these became stages for divine revelation, not obstacles to divine purpose. As we prepare to drift into sleep tonight, there is profound rest available in this reality. Whatever storms we face, they do not take Jesus by surprise. Whatever fears arise within us, they do not diminish his power. Whatever threatens to overwhelm us, it cannot overrule his sovereign declaration over our lives. If Jesus has said to us, in any area of our lives, "Let us go to the other side," then we can rest assured that no storm, internal or external, can prevent us from reaching the destination he has established. The journey may include unexpected turbulence. We may experience moments of genuine fear, but the presence of Jesus in our boat, in our lives, our circumstances, our hearts, guarantees safe passage. This doesn't mean we won't get wet, doesn't mean the journey will always feel comfortable or proceed according to our preferred timeline. The disciples in that boat experienced genuine terror before they witnessed miraculous calm. They got soaked to the skin. They may have lost cargo overboard. The boat likely required bailing out and repairs afterward, but they made it to the other side because Jesus had declared that this would be so, and in the process, they came to know him more deeply than they had before. The storm became not an obstacle to their progress, but a vehicle for their spiritual growth. As we reflect on this story one final time tonight, let's consider 3 enduring comforts it offers to all who journey with Jesus. First, Jesus is present in every storm. He may not manifest his power immediately or in the ways we expect, but he's never absent from our struggles. The psalmist wrote, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging." Psalm 46, 1 and 3. This presence is not just comforting, it is transformative. It changes how we experience our circumstances, even when it doesn't immediately change the circumstances themselves. Second, Jesus' timing is perfect. He allowed the storm to rage for a time before calming it, not because he was indifferent to the disciples' fear, but because the experience would deepen their understanding and strengthen their faith. Similarly, when he seems silent or inactive in our lives, it is never due to indifference. His timing takes into account purposes and perspectives that extend and far beyond our immediate comfort, encompassing our long-term growth and God's eternal glory. Third, Jesus' authority is absolute. When he spoke to the wind and waves, they had no choice but to obey. The same voice that said, "Let there be light" at creation now said, "Be still" to the storm, with the same creative authority and the same immediate result. This ultimate authority means that nothing we face, no circumstance, no enemy, no fear, no failure, is beyond his power to redeem, restore, or transform according to his perfect will. These truths don't eliminate life's storms, but they fundamentally change how we experience them. They allow us to sleep, literally and figuratively, in the sovereignty of the one who has promised to bring us safely to the other side. As your body relaxes more deeply now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine yourself in that boat after the storm has ceased. Feel the gentle rocking of the vessel on calm waters. See the stars reflected on the surface like scattered diamonds. Hear the quiet lapping of small waves against the wooden hull. And most importantly, know that Jesus is there with you, awake, aware, almighty. The night is passing. Dawn approaches. The shore draws nearer with each moment. And the one who commanded the storm with a word continues to hold you in the palm of his hand, guiding your vessel to exactly where he intends it to go. In this assurance there is deep peace. In this knowledge there is perfect rest. In this presence there is complete safety. Whether we find ourselves currently in the midst of a raging storm, in the calm that follows, or in the ordinary moments between dramatic events, the truth remains. Jesus is with us. Jesus is for us, and Jesus will bring us safely to the other side. So breathe deeply now. Release the tension you may be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands, your mind. Allow your body to grow heavy with approaching sleep.